Attend, O reader, our tale of wonder. Welcome back to Paper Cuts, everyone. Last week we finished off A Princess of Mars, and this week we're kind of continuing the journey of not necessarily other worlds this week, but movement to places unknown. This week's book is The Eye of Istar, a romance of the land of no return by William Lequeux, which hopefully I'm saying right. I don't quite trust my French pronunciation, so I'm glad this has been translated into English. Uh, I found this one digging around in an old archive of other public domain things that's not my usual archive of public domain things, so we'll see if it's good. Just from the opening preface here is, it bodes well, it's a good sign. Thank you for your input, library. I wonder if you all could hear him. He is sitting just perfectly the slightest amount in the way. I will post a picture in the Discord later if he's I'll post a picture in the Discord at the intermission if he's still there. But like I said, he is the slightest amount in the way, and it's just perfect. It's like, okay, yeah, he knows I'm looking up here and everything. I've dallied. Let's get started, shall we? The preface. Peace, O reader, constant, blessed, and abundant salutations. Of a verity, the groves of my hopes have been refreshed by cooling showers from the clouds of Allah's blessing. My rose garden has been weeded of the thorns of despondency, and the tree of my prosperity has become fruit-bearing from the breeze of his bounty. He is the giver of gifts, the source of liberality, the sovereign, the dust of whose sandals is deservedly the carilium of the eyes of mortal men. And I, called by my fellows El Mortar de Jim, am the servant who, in compliance with the exalted command, have placed my finger of acquiescence on the vision of obedience. During many hopeless nights, I waited for the radiation of the sun, of the benefits of prosperity, and counted the stars till the rise of dawn, but by my ill luck and the machinations of enemies was deprived of the felicity of penetrating the mystery of the land forbidden. At length, however, on a happy day when the fire of my anguish burned so brightly that it was not easy to extinguish it with the water of patience, the abolisher of the signs of darkness and aberration invested me with a robe of the favored, guarded me through the calamities and vicissitudes of fortune during long journeys, directed my footsteps through the mazes of the paths untrodden, and revealed unto my dazzled eyes weird and wondrous marvels stranger than men have dreamed. Therefore, O reader, wipe the dust of ennui and fatigue from the speculum of thy mind, withdraw the tongue of blame into thy palate, and lend a willing ear to this my Tariq. For verily I have elucidated the secret of the mystic land of no return. I have torn the veil that hideth the great skin from the eyes of men, and have gazed in the eye of Ishtar. Inshallah. Prologue. Thrice hath the feast of Ramadan come and gone since the greater of requests last allowed my eyes to behold the well-remembered landscape, scarcely visible in the pale light of dawn. Hills covered with tall feathery palms rose abruptly from their barren, sun-scorched plain, and at their foot stood the dazzlingly white city of Omdurman, the impregnable and mysterious headquarters of Mahdism, while beyond, like a silver ribbon winding through the marshes, the Nile gilded, half veiled by its thin white cloud of morning vapors. Within the walled and strongly guarded city was a scene strange and fantastic. The air, heavy with war rumors, was rent by the deafening strokes of enormous brazen tam-tams, mingling with the loud shouts of dark-faced Yalins. Here we go. Once again, reminding you of the blanket disclaimer that these books are old. There's gonna be words in here that were fine at the time and make me grimace. Read the blanket disclaimer down below me if you are concerned. That's all I'll say. Mingling with the loud shouts of dark-faced Yalins, half-faced Negro fanatics of the Kunjara, and the Dinka, armed cap-a-pie, ready for battle at a moment's notice. The excitement, which had increased daily for many months, had risen to a feverish heat. Throughout the short, hot night, the great Nahas, those huge brass war drums of the Khalifa Abdullah, ruler of the Sudan, had been beaten by relays of perspiring slaves, glittering with beads and trinkets, the indescribable monotonous rhythm causing the wild, excited populace to cry Nailkum and Nakalum, as in the fresh, cool hour when the wolf's tail, the first brushes of grey light which appear as forerunners of the dawn, showed in the heavens. They seized guns, spears, and shields, and rushing from their houses across the great square of Abuanga, they congregated in the wide open space near the tree of Hadra, where the Raya Zerga, or the dreaded black standard of the Khalifa, hung ominous and motionless in the morning air. Wild-haired men sped fleetly to and fro, brandishing their gleaming arms and apostrophizing Iblis. Women left their millet unbeaten and followed, while musicians chanted war songs softly in a sad falsetto, accompanying themselves upon their little ginkris, those queer two-stringed guitars fashioned from a tortoise shell, which give forth a dismal sound like the chirping of a grasshopper of the oasis. The servants of the merciful are those who walk meekly on the earth, and when the ignorant speak to them, answer peace, and those who pass the night adoring Allah and standing up to pray upon him and say, O Allah, avert us from the torment of hell, for the torment thereof is perpetual. Verily, the same is a miserable abode, and who when they bestow are neither profuse nor niggardly, but observe a just medium between these, and who invoke not another God altogether with the one Allah, and neither slay the soul which Allah thus hath forgiven to be slain, unless for a just cause. The dervishes were going forth to battle. Sorry, I'm gonna pause here. I was not expecting this book to immediately do this. I I read the summary for this book out in the world, and I grabbed it. I read the first couple pages. I was like, oh, this is interesting. These are interesting scenes it's setting, and I'm very nervous that I'm mispronouncing things now. Is what I will say. Did I remember to set that up? Speaking of things while I'm paused here. Did I remember to set up this? No, I did not. Fun. Let me see if I can set this up real quick. Content disclaimer. I meant to add a command here. Okay, good, that works. So now I have given the bot the ability to tell you about the disclaimer. So every time it comes up, if you don't want to read the long version underneath me here, and now that makes more sense. So now I can be like, hey, I'm reading a thing. Plus the disclaimer's on screen for now, which is especially good given this book. Where was I? I've also, like... Oh, this is weird. I have changed the way the... I've changed the way that things are set up right now. I'm taking a different approach, and things look a little different. Give me a second. Filters. Remove some of the cropping here, because it's the whole page. Sorry, I meant to adjust this before stream. And I didn't. Zeet zeet zoot, says the phone. Anything interesting? No, just Uber wasting my time. You find somebody to drive 45 minutes out here, and then we'll talk. Yeah, I lost my book reader settings here, is what I did. Well, oops. Yeah, I lost my reader settings here, and so they don't quite look right anymore. Where were we? Dervishes is where we were. I appreciate your patience, everybody. Let's keep going. On one side of the spacious review ground frowned the castellated walls of the imposing white fortress, held so long by Fargalia Pasha against the fierce hordes of the Mahdi. On the other, the ill-built quarters of the Gennadian, the ill-built quarters of the Gennadian, or regular soldiers, while the single tree in the center was historical by the reason of the head of Gordon, the brave Pasha of the infidels having been exhibited thereon by order of our tyrannical lord, the Mahdi. It was at this spot that the wild multitude heaped curses upon the last grim relic of the gallant, deserted hero of Khartoum, the man whose matchless bravery and dogged perseverance were alike admired by my own co-religionists as well as the infidels themselves. But the Mahdi, Khalifarat el-Rasul, the great false prophet, renowned throughout the world, who, by inducing us to believe that by his supernatural influence he could transform the bullets of the white men into water, caused us to flock to his standard and attempt to conquer the Sudan. He was now dead, and the power of the Caliph Abdullah supreme. 7 years ago had the hand of Allah's justice fallen heavily upon the hypocritical imitator of the great prophet, who asserted that he could part the great waters of the Nile, that his body was invulnerable, and was so successful in his ingenious impostures that the people threw themselves down frantically to kiss the spots that his crimson slippers had touched, while the water in which he performed his ablutions was drunk as an unfailing remedy for every sort of malady. The very dust of his sandals was declared to be the coryllium of eyes of men. But the struggle with the English, the fall of El Obeid, the capture of Galabat, and the defeat and death of the king of Abyssinia were events now long past and forgotten. Actually, impulse control here today. I am feeling impulsive, and so I am going to pick a different book. I was waffling, I'll freely admit, I was waffling between this and one other book, and as I am reading this, I feel like I am missing a lot of context for this book. And so, in the interest of doing this book justice, because it looks very fun, I'm actually interested already. Uh, but I don't want to do it wrong because it looks, like I said, it looks fun, and so I'm like, oh, I don't want to. Like, this is one of those where like I need like English class context on it. You know what I mean? Apologies. Where is the jars? There's one about 5 jars here that I'm so sure I downloaded, and I don't know where it got off to. Paper cuts. Where is... I had one that was like the 5 jars of Isis or something. Ah, there it is. I found it. It's just the 5 jars. Here we are. It's so funny. As soon as I opened the book, I have like a little like there's a piece of bloatware on my machine that's like NVIDIA game experience, and as soon as I opened the book, the little game experience, press the game experience button to do the game experience thing. Um Came up. So it's like, "Oh, yes. Gamer book." You know? Which is a good nutshell to put my channel in. Anyway, uh now that I've beaten off my indecision here. Let's read the actual book that I was initially thinking of reading tonight, and I was like, no, I'll try this other one. Now that I've bonked my indecision over the head, let's actually read The 5 Jars by M.R. James, author of Ghost Stories of an Antiquary. Which is, if I like this book, I'm gonna go find Ghost Stories of an Antiquary, I hope you know. Let me grab some tea before we start. Okay. The Discovery. My dear Jane, you remember that you were puzzled when I told you I had heard something from the owls. Or, if not puzzled, for I know you have some experience of those things, you were at any rate anxious to know exactly how it happened. Perhaps the time has now come for you to be told. It was really luck, and not any skill of mine, that put me in the way of it. Luck, and also being ready to believe more than I could see. I've promised not to put down on paper the name of the wood where it happened. That I can keep till we meet, but all the rest I can tell it is as exactly as it came about. I know, yay, disclaimer. So fun. Everybody loves disclaimer. It's the best part of the stream. It is a wood with a stream at the edge of it. The water is brown and clear. On the other side of it are flat meadows, and beyond these a hillside quite covered with an oak wood. The stream has alder trees along it, and is pretty well shaded over. The sun hits it in places, and makes flecks of light through the leaves. The day I am thinking of was a very hot one in early September. I'd come across the meadows with some idea of sitting by the stream and having a hiccup, apparently. Uh, the day I'm thinking of was a very hot one in early September. I'd come across the meadows with some idea of sitting by the stream and reading. The only change in my plans that I made was, instead of sitting down, I lie down. Instead of reading, I went to sleep. You know how sometimes, but very, very seldom, you see something in a dream which you're quite sure is real? So it was with me this time. I did not dream any story or see any people. I only dreamt of a plant. In the dream, no one told me anything about it. I just saw it growing under a tree. A small bit of the tree root came into the picture, and an old gnarled root covered with moss, and 3 sorts of eyes in it, round holes trimmed with moss. You know the kind. The plant was not one I should have thought much about, though certainly it was not one I knew. It had no flowers or berries, and grew quite squat in the ground, more like a yellow aconite without the flower than anything else. It seemed to consist of a ring of 6 leaves spread out pretty flat with 9 points on each leaf. As I say, I saw this quite clearly, and remembered it because 6 times 9 makes 54, which happens to be a number I had a particular reason for remembering at that moment. Well, there was no more in the dream than that, but such as it was, it fixed itself in my mind like a photograph, and I was sure that if I ever saw that tree root and that plant, I should know them again. And though I've never, and though I neither saw nor heard, this sentence is making me struggle, apparently. And though I neither saw nor heard anything more of them than I've told you, it was borne upon my mind that the plant was worth finding. When I woke up, I still lay, feeling very lazy, on the grass with my head within a foot or two of the edge of the stream, and listened to its noise until in 5 or 6 minutes, whether I began to doze off again or not doesn't much matter here, the water sound became like words and said, trickle up, an immense number of times. It pleased me, for though in poetry we hear a great deal about babbling brooks, and though I'm particularly fond of the noises they do make, I was never able to pretend that I could hear any words. And so when I did finally get up and shake myself awake, I thought I would anyhow pay so much attention to what the water said as to stroll up the stream instead of down. And so I did. It took me through the flat meadows, but still along the edge of the wood, and still every now and then I heard the same peculiar noise which sounded like trickle up. Not so very long after, I came to a place where another stream ran out of the wood into the one that I'd been following, and just below the place where the two joined there was not a bridge but a pole across, and another pole to serve as a rail by which you could cross without trouble. I did cross, not thinking much about it, but with some idea of looking at this new little stream, which went at a very quick pace, and seemed to promise small rapids and waterfalls a little higher up. Now when I got to the edge of it, there was no mistake. It was saying trickle up, or even track up, much plainer than the old one had. I stepped across it, and went a few yards up the old stream. Before the new one joined in, it was saying nothing of the kind. I went back to the new one. It was talking about as plain as print. Of course, there were no two words about what must be done now. Here was something quite new, and even if I missed my tea, it had got to be looked into. So I went up the new stream, into the wood. Though I was well on the lookout for unusual things, in particular that plant, which I couldn't help but thinking about, I cannot say there was anything peculiar about the stream, or the plants, or the insects, or the trees, except the words which the water kept saying, so long as I was in the flat part of the wood. But as soon as I came up to a steepish bank, the land began to slope up very suddenly, and rapids and waterfalls of the brook were very gay and interesting. Then, besides track up, which was now its word always instead of trickle, I heard every now and then an all right, which was encouraging and exciting. Still, there was nothing out of the way to be seen, look as I might. The climb up the slope or bank was very long. At the top was a kind of terrace, pretty level and with large old trees growing upon it, mainly oaks. Behind there was a further slope and more woodland, but that doesn't matter now. For the present, I was at the end of my wanderings. There was no more stream, and I had found what of all natural things I think pleases me best, a real spring of water, quite untouched. 5 or 6 oaks grew in something like a semicircle, and it was in the middle of the flat ground in front of them that I found this round pool, almost perfectly round, not more than 4 or 5 feet across. The bottom of it, in the middle, was pale sand, which was continually rising up in little egg-shaped mounds and falling down again. It was the clearest and strongest spring of the kind I'd ever seen, and I could have watched it for hours. I did sit down by it and watch it for some time without thinking of anything but the luck I had had to find it. But then I began to wonder if it would say anything. Naturally, I couldn't expect it to say track up any more, for here I was at the end of it. So I listened with some curiosity. It hardly made so much noise as the stream. The pool was deeper, but I thought it must say something, so I put my head down as close as I could to the surface of the water. If I'm not mistaken, and as things turned out, I'm sure I was right, the words were gather, gather, pick, pick, or quick, quick. Now, I had not been thinking about the plant for a little time, but, as you may suppose, this brought it back to my mind, and I got up and began to look about, at the roots of the old oaks which grew just round the spring. No, none of the roots on this side which faced toward the water were like that which I'd seen. Still, the feeling was strong upon me that this, if anything, was the kind of place, and perhaps even the very place, where the plant must be. So I walked to the back of the trees, being careful to go from right to left, according to the course of the sun. Well, I was not mistaken. At the back of the middlemost oak tree there were the roots I had dreamt of, with the moss and the holes like eyes, and between them was the plant. I think the only thing which was new to me in the look of it was so extraordinarily green. It seemed to have in it all the greenness that was possible or could be wanted for in a whole field of grass. I actually had some scruples about touching it. In fact, I went back to the spring and listened to make sure it was still saying the same thing. And it was. Gather, gather, pick. But there was something else every now and again which I could not for the life of me make out at first. I lay down, put my hand round my ear, and held my breath. Might have been something like bark tree, or dark tree, or cask free, even. I got impatient at last, and said, Well, I'm very sorry, but do what I will, I cannot make out what you're trying to say. Instantly, a little spurt of water hit me on the ear, and I heard, as clear as possible, what it was. Ask tree. I got up at once. I beg your pardon, of course. Thank you very much. And the water went on, saying, Gather, gather, all right, dip, dip. Oh. Oh, is there another sneeze in there? We'll wait for a second, just to make sure. Hmm. Hmm. After thinking how best to greet it, I went back to the oak, stood in front of it, and said, of course baring my head, Oak, I humbly desire your good leave to gather the green plant which grows between your roots. If an acorn falls into this my right hand, which I held out, I will count it that you answer yes, and give you thanks. The acorn fell straight into the palm of my hand, and so I said, I thank you, Oak. Good growth to you. I will lay this your acorn in the place where I gather the plant. Then, very carefully, I took hold of the stalk of the plant, which was very short, for, as I said, it grew rather flat on the ground, and pulled. To my surprise, it came up as easily as a mushroom would. It had a clean, round bulb without any rootlets, and left a smooth, neat hole in the ground, which, according to promise, I laid the acorn and covered it with earth. I think it very likely that it'll turn into a second plant. Then I remembered the last word of the spring, and went back to dip the plant in it. I had a shock when I did so, and it was lucky I was holding it firm, for when it touched the water it struggled in my hand like a fish or a newt would, and almost slipped out. I dipped it 3 times, and though I felt it growing smaller in my hand, indeed, I looked at it, I'd found that it shut up its leaves and curled them in quite close, so the whole thing was little more than a bowl. As I looked at it, I thought the water changed its note and said, That'll do, that'll do. I thought it was time to thank the spring for all it had done for me, though, as you may suppose, I did not know in the least what was to be done with the plant, or what use it was going to be. So I went over and said in the politest words I could how much I was obliged, and if there was anything I had or could do which would be agreeable, how glad I should be. Then I listened carefully, for it seemed by this time quite natural that I should get some sort of answer. And the answer came. There was a sudden change in the sound, and the water said clearly and rapidly, Silver, 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 silver. I felt in my pocket, and luckily I did have several shillings, sixpences, and half-crowns. I thought the best way was to offer them all, so I put them in the palm of my right hand and held it under the water, open, just over the dancing sand. For a few seconds the water ran over the silver without doing anything, only the coins seemed to grow very bright and clean. Then one of the shillings was very neatly and very smoothly slid off, then another, and a sixpence for that matter. I waited, but no more happened, and the water seemed to draw itself down and away from my hand, and to say, all right. So I got up. The 3 coins on the bottom of the pool lay there, looking brighter than even the newest I've ever seen, and gradually as they lay there, they began to appear larger. The shillings looked like half-crowns, and the sixpence like a shilling. I thought for a moment that it was because water magnifies, but I soon saw this could not be the reason, for they went on growing larger, and of course thinner, until they spread into a kind of silver film all over the bottom of the pool, and as they did so, the water began to take on a musical sound, much like the singing that comes when you wet your finger and draw it round the edge of a finger glass at dessert, which some people's idea of table manners allows them to do. It was a pretty sight and sound, and I listened and looked for a long time. So the water was saying words, and now it's doing that, the very pure tone that you get out of a wine glass. But all this time, what had become of the plant? Why, when I gave the silver to the spring, I'd wrapped the plant carefully in a silk handkerchief and put it safe in my breast pocket. I took the handkerchief out now, and for a moment I was afraid the plant was gone, but it was not. It's just shrunk to a very small, whitey green ball. What was to be done with it? Rather, what could it do? It was plain to me it must have a strange and valuable property or virtue, since I'd been put on its track in such a remarkable way. I thought I could not do better than ask the spring. I said, "Oh, spring of water, have I your good leave to ask what I should do with this precious plant to put it to the best use?" The silver lining of the spring made its words much easier to catch when it said anything, for I should tell you that for the most part it didn't speak, not in any language that I could understand, but rather sang. And now it said, "Swallow, swallow, drink, swallow." Prompt obedience, dear Jane, has always been my motto, as it is doubtless yours, and I at once laid myself down, drank a mouthful of water from the spring, and put the little bulb in my mouth. It instantly grew soft and slipped down my throat. How prosaic! I have no idea what it tasted like. And again I addressed the spring. "Is there anything more for me to do?" "No, no, 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 no. You'll see, you'll see. Goodbye, goodbye," was the answer that came at once. Accordingly, I once more thanked the spring, wished it clear water, no mud, no tramplings of cattle, and bade it farewell, but I said I should hope to visit it again. Then I turned away and looked about me, wondering whether, now that I had swallowed the mysterious plant, that I should see anything different. The only thing I noticed was due, I suppose, not to the plant, but to the spring, but it was still odd enough. All the trees nearby were crowded with little birds of all kinds, sitting in rows on the branches as they do on those telegraph wires. I have no doubt they were listening to the silver bell in the spring. They were quite still, and did not take any notice when I began to walk away. I said, you will remember, that the ground I was on was a sort of flat terrace at the top of a steep slope. Now at one end this terrace just went down into the wood, but at the other end there was a little mound or hillock with thick underwood behind it. I felt a curiosity, an inclination to walk that way. I have very little doubt that the plant was at the bottom of it. As I walked, I looked at the ground and noticed a curious thing. The roots of the plants and grasses seemed to show more than I was accustomed to seeing them. It was not a great way to the hillock. When I got to it, I wondered why I had gone, for there was nothing odd about it. Still, I stepped on to the top, and then I did see something, namely, a square flat stone just in front of my feet. I poked at it with my walking stick, but somehow I did not seem to touch it, nor was there any scraping noise. This was funny. I tried again, and now I saw that my stick was not touching it at all. There was something in between. I felt with my hands, and they met with something that seemed like grass and earth, not like stone. Then I understood. The plant was one which makes you able to see what's under the ground. I need not tell you all I thought, or how surprising and delightful it was. The first thing was to get the flat stone and find out what was underneath it. Accordingly, what with a knife and what with my fingers, I soon had it uncovered. There were 4 or 5 inches under the surface. There were no marks on this rock. It measured more than a foot each way. I lifted it, and it was the cover of a sort of box, with bottom and sides each made of a slab, just like the lid. In this box was another made of some dark metal which I took to be lead. I pulled it out and found that the lid of the box was all of one piece with the rest, like a sardine tin. Evidently, I could not open it there and then. It was rather heavy, but I didn't care, and managed without too much inconvenience to carry it home to the place which I was lodging in. Of course, I put the stone back neatly and covered it up with earth and grass again. I was late for tea, yes, but I had found what was better than tea. For those of you who weren't here last winter when I was drinking a lot of that Mr. Jekyll, it is Thai holy basil, chamomile, and rooibos. Very nice blend. Kind of has like a very herbaceous but not green note to it. The chamomile really shines through as one of the afterthought flavors, so to speak. The holy basil kind of melds with the rooibos in such a way to almost bring to mind like a sarsaparilla or or like a sassafras to me, very faintly, and that's mostly just my impression, kind of coming out of not having an abundance of familiarity with the flavor components that are probably supposed to be coming out of this. It's a little bit bubblegum-y in that way too. That stereotypical bright pink bubblegum taste. It's very pleasant. It's very calming, and it's decaffeinated, or it doesn't have any caffeine in it because it's just rooibos tea. And I must admit, the name really does work wonders in selling it to me. I wouldn't think of it quite so often as I do paper cuts, if it were not for the name Dr. Jekyll. Fittingly, there is a Mr. Hyde blend, and it is much more aggressively caffeinated. Which we did Jekyll and Hyde during season 1, as I recall. It's definitely one I have done. No, I definitely did Jekyll and Hyde because it only took me 2 episodes, and I was like, that's much shorter than I remember it to be. Uh, so, mm. One more thing while we're on the topic of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. There is an email list going around right now where you can sign up to it, and it sends you a chapter of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde once a week, kind of in the same vein as that Dracula Daily that ran until recently. I signed up for that one. I thought it was I thought it would be fun. I've already read it for paper cuts, and I've read it a few times on my own, and I thought it was quite clever. Anyway, chapter 2, The First Jar. That night I waited until the moon was up before trying to open the box. I did not know well why, but it seemed the right thing, and I followed my instinct, feeling that it might be the plant that made me think as I did. I drew up the blind and laid the box on a table near the window where the moon shone full on it, and waited to see if anything else occurred to me. Suddenly I heard a sort of metallic snap. I went and looked at the box. Nothing appeared on the side nearest to me, but when I turned it round, I saw that all along the side which the moon had shone upon, there was a line upon the metal. I turned another side to the moonlight, and another snap came in 2 or 3 minutes. Of course, I went on. When the moon had made a groove on all 4 sides, I tried the lid. It would not come off yet, so there was nothing to be done but continue the process. 3 times I did it. Every side I turned the moon thrice, and when that was done, the lid was free. I lifted it, and what did I see in the box? All this writing would be little use if I didn't tell you, so I must. There were 5 compartments in the box. In each of them was a little jar or vase of glass with a round body, a narrow neck, and spreading out a little at the top. The top of each was covered with a plate of metal, and on each plate was a word or two in capital letters. On the one in the middle were the words unge oculos. The other jars had one word apiece: aures, linguam, frontem, pectus. Now, years ago, I took great pains to learn the Latin language, and on many occasions I have found it most useful, whatever you may see to the contrary in the newspaper, but seldom or never have I found it more useful than now. I saw at once that the words meant anoint the eyes, the ears, the tongue, the forehead, and the chest. What would be the result of my doing this, of course, I knew no more than you do, but I was pretty sure that it would not do to try them all at once, and another thing I felt, that it would be better to wait till next day before trying any of them. It was past midnight now, so I went to bed, but first I locked up the box in a cupboard, for I didn't want anyone to see it yet. Next day I woke bright and early, looked at my watch, and found there was no need to think about getting up yet, and, like a wise creature, went to sleep again. I mention this not merely by way of being jocose, but because after I went to sleep I had a dream which most likely came from the plant and certainly had to do with the box. I seemed to see a room, or to be in a room, about which I only noticed the floor was paved with mosaic, in a pattern mostly red and white. There were no pictures on the wall, no fireplace, no sashes, or even indeed panes in the windows, and the moon was shining in very brightly. There was a table and a chest. Then I saw an old man, rather badly shaved and bald, in Roman dress, white for the most part, with a purple stripe somewhere, and sandals. He looked by no means a wicked or designing old man, and I was glad of that. He opened the chest, took out my box, and placed it carefully on the table in the moonlight. Then he went to the part of the room I couldn't see, and I heard a sound of water being poured into a metal basin, and he came into sight again, wiping his hands on a white towel. He opened the box, took out a little silver spoon in one of the jars, took off the lid, and dipped the spoon in the jar, and touched first his right eye, then his left with it. Then he put the jar and the spoon back, laid the lid on the box, and put it back in the chest. After that he went to the window and stood there looking out, seeming to be very much amused with what he saw. And that was all. "No hints for me," I remember thinking. "Perhaps it will be best not to touch the box before the moon is up tonight, and always with washed hands." I suppose I woke up immediately, for it was all very fresh in my mind when I did. It was something of a disappointment to have put off my experiments till the night time came round. But it was all for the best, for letters came by the post which I had to attend to. In fact, I was obliged to go to the town a little way off to see someone and send telegrams and so on. I was a little doubtful about the seeing things underground, but I soon found that unless I, so to say, turned on the tap and specially wished and tried to use the power, it did not interfere with my ordinary seeing. When I did, it seemed to come forward from the back of my eyes and was stronger than the day before. I could see rabbits in their burrows and followed the roots of one oak tree very deep down. Once it threatened to be awkward when I stooped to pick up a silver coin in the street and grazed my knuckles against the paving stone, under which of course, it was. So much for that. By the way, I had taken a look at the box after breakfast and found, not very much to my surprise, that the lid was as tight on as when I had found it first. After dinner that evening, I put out the light, the moon being very now bright, placed the box on the table, washed my hands, opened it, and, shutting my eyes, put my hand on one of the jars at random and took it out. As I had rather expected, I heard a little rattle as I did so, and feeling in the compartment, I found a little, very little spoon. All was well, now to see which jar chance or the plant had chosen for my first experiment. I took it to the window. It was the one marked Auris, ears, and the spoon had on the handle a letter A. I opened the jar. The lid fitted close, but not over tightly. I put in the spoon as the old man had done, as near as I could remember. It brought out a very small drop of thick stuff, which I had touched first my right ear and then my left. When I had done so, I looked at the spoon, and it was perfectly dry. I put it and the jar back, closed the box, locked it up, and, not knowing in the least what to expect, went to the open window and put my head out. For some little time I heard nothing. That was to be expected, and I was not in the least inclined to distrust the jar, but then I was rewarded. A bat flew by, and I, who have not heard a bat even squeak these 20 years, now heard this one say, in a whistling, angry tone, would you? I've got you. No, drat. It was not a very exciting remark, but it was enough to show me that a whole new world, as the books say, was open to me. This, of course, was only a beginning. There were some plants and flowering shrubs under the window, and though I could see nothing, I began to hear voices, 2 voices, talking among them. They sounded young. Of course, they were, anyhow, very small, but they seemed to belong to young creatures of their kind. Hello, I say, what have you got there? Do let's look, you might as well. There was a pause, another voice. I believe it's a bad one. Taste it. Number 2, after another pause, with a slight sound, very diminutive of spitting. Ew, bad, I rather think it was. It was a maggot. Number 1, after laughing rather longer than I thought kind. Look here, don't chuck it away. Let's give it to the old man. Here, shove the piece in again and rub it over. Here he is. And very demurely. Oh, sir, we've got such a nice looking... I couldn't catch what it was. Here, and we thought you might perhaps like it, sir. Would you, sir? Oh, no, thank you, sir. We've had plenty, sir, but this was the biggest we found. A third voice said something. It was a deeper one and less easy to hear. Bitten, sir? No, I don't think so. Do you... A name which I did not make out. Oh, why, how could it be? Number 3 again, angrily, I thought. And number 2 rather anxiously. But, sir, really, sir, I don't much like them, must I really, sir? Oh, sir, it's got a maggot in it. I believe those are poison. Smack, 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 smack. 2 voices, very lamentable. Oh, sir, please, sir. A considerable pause and sniffling. Then number 2 in a broken voice. You silly fool, why do you go laughing like that under his snout? You might have known he'd cog it. Cog? I'd not heard that word since 1876. There will be an awful row tomorrow. Look here, I'm going to bed. The voices died away, despite the fact that I thought number 1 seemed to be apologizing. That was all I heard that night in particular. After 11 o'clock, things seemed to get very still, and I began to feel just a little apprehensive, lest something of a less innocent kind should come along. So I went to bed. I'm very interested in the concept here. So he's using these jars he found in the ground, and they seem to be very thoroughly augmenting his senses. Curiouser and curiouser. Chapter 3. The Second Jar. Next day, I must say, was very amusing. Hang on. Library is in the way. Library. You want to come down here? You want to come lay down here? Yeah, I love you too. Thank you for the blink. You want to come down here so you're not in the way? Are you sure? I'd really appreciate it. Come here. You want to come down here? Promise, I'll bet you. You're comfy up there, aren't you? Anyway. Next day, I must say, was very amusing. I spent the whole of it in the fields, just strolling about and sitting down as the fancy took me, listening to what went on in the trees and hedges. I will not write down yet the kind of thing I heard, for it was only the beginning. I had not yet found out the way of using the new power to the very best advantage. I felt the want of being able to put in a remark or a question of my own every now and then, but I was pretty sure that the jar which had linguam on it would manage that. Very nearly all the talking I heard was done by birds and animals, especially the birds, but perhaps half a dozen times, as I sat under a tree or walked along the road, I was aware of voices which sound exactly like those of people, some grown up and some children, passing by or coming toward me and talking to each other as we went along. Needless to say, there was nothing to be seen, no movement of the grass, and no tracks on the dusty road either, even when I could tell exactly where the people who owned the voices must be. It interested me more than anything else to guess what sort of creatures they were, and I determined the next jar I tried should be the eye one. Once, I must tell you, I ventured to say good afternoon when I heard a couple of these voices within a yard of me. I think the owners must have nearly had a fit. They stopped dead. One of them gave sort of a cry of surprise. Then I believe they ran or flew away. I felt a little breath of wind on my face and heard no more. It wasn't, as I know now, that they couldn't see me, but they felt as much as you would if a tree or crow or a cow were to say good afternoon to you. When I was at supper that evening, the cat came in, as she usually did, to see what was going on. I'd always been accustomed to think that cats talk when they mew, dogs when they bark, and so on, but that's not the case at all. Their talking is almost all done, except when they're in a great state of mind, in a tone which you cannot possibly hear without help. Mewing is for the most part only shouting without saying any words. Purring is, as we often say, singing. Well, this cat was an ordinary nice creature, Tabby, and in she came, sat watching me while I had soup. To all appearance she was innocent as a lamb, but no matter for that. What she was saying was something of this kind. Get on with it, do. Shove it down, lap it up, who cares about soup? Get to business, I know there's fish coming. When the fish actually came, there was a great deal of good feeling shown at first. Oh, how much we have to be thankful for, all of us, have we not? Fish, fish, what a thought! Dear, kind, generous people all round us, all striving to supply us with what is best and pleasantest for us. Then there was a silence for a short time. Then in a somewhat different tone I heard, "Oh dear, the longer I live, the wiser I find it when it is not to expect too much consideration from others. Self-love, how few, how terribly few are really free from it. The nature really knows how to take a hint, how rare it is." Another silence, and then, "There you go, another great bit. I wonder why you don't choke or burst. Disgusting. A good scratch down your horrible fat cheek is what you want. I know some cats that'd give it to you. No more notion how to behave than a cockroach." About this time I rang the bell, and the fish was taken away. The cat went too, circling round the maid with trusting and childlike glances. I heard her saying in that former tone, "Well, I dare say there are some kind hearts in the world, some that can feel for a poor weary creature, and know what a great deal of strength and nourishment even the littlest bit of fish can give," and I lost the rest. When the time came and the box was open once more, I duly anointed my eyes and went to the window. I knew something of what I might expect to see, but I had not realized at all how much of it there would be. In the first place, there were a great many buildings, in fact, a regular village, all about the little lawn on which my window looked. They were, of course, not big. Perhaps 3 feet high was the largest size. The roofs seemed to be of tiles, the walls were white, the windows were brightly lighted, and I could see people moving about inside. But there were plenty of people outside, too, people about 6 inches high, walking about, standing around, talking, running, playing some game which might have been hockey. These were on leveled spaces, for the grass, neatly kept as it was, would have come some halfway up their legs, and there were some driving around along smooth tracks, and carriages drawn by horses of that right size, which were really the most charming little animals I ever did see. You may suppose that I should not soon have gotten tired of watching them and listening to the little treble buzz of voices that went on, but I was interrupted. Just in front of me I heard what only I can call a snigger. I looked down and saw 4 heads. A snicker? We would spell that snicker now, right? Like, that's not a different word? Is my brain melting? Hang on. Like snicker, titter. Yeah, it just is spelled differently. That is the same word. My brain's not melting. We're good. They heard this. They were snickering, chuckling, chortling even. Anyway, I looked down and saw 4 heads supported by 4 pairs of elbows leaning on the windowsill and looking up at me. They belonged to 4 boys who were standing on the twigs of a bush that grew up against the wall, and who seemed to be very much amused. Every now and again one of them nudged another and pointed toward me, then for some unexplained reason they snickered again. I felt my ears growing warm and red. Well, gentlemen, you seem to be enjoying yourselves. I keep giving this guy the Milrus voice. He does not have the Milrus voice. He's just got a bit of an accent. Well, young gentlemen, you seem to be enjoying yourselves. I heard no answer. I appear to be so fortunate as to afford you some gratification. That's why I don't touch my phone. Anyway, gratification, that's where I was. I went on in my sarcastic manner. Perhaps you could do me the honor of stepping into my poor apartment. Again, no answer, but more undisguised amusement. I was thinking out a really withering remark when one of them said, "Don't you look at his nose. I wonder if they know how ridiculous they are. I should like to talk to one of them for 5 minutes." Well, that could be arranged very easily, and I assure you I'd be equally glad of the opportunity. My remarks would deal with the subject of good manners. Another one spoke this time, but didn't answer me. "Oh, I don't know. I expect they're pretty stupid. Look at it. At least this one does." "Can they talk?" said the third. "I've never heard them." "Oh, no, but you can see them moving their jaws and mouths and things. This one did just now." I saw how it was now, and becoming cooler, I recognized that these youths were behaving very much as I might have done myself in the presence of someone who I was sure could neither see nor hear me. I even smiled. One of them pointed at me at once. "Thought of a joke, I suppose. Don't keep it all to yourself, old chap." At this moment, the fourth one, who hadn't said anything so far, but seemed to have been listening, piped up. "I say, I believe I know what it is that makes that hammering noise. Something he's got in his clothes." I couldn't resist this. "Right again. It's my watch, and you're very welcome to look at it." I took it out and put it on the window sill. An awful horror and surprise came into their faces. In a second they had dived down like so many ducks. In another second I saw them walking across the grass, and each of them threw his arms round the waist or the neck of one of the elder people who were walking about among the houses. The person so attacked pulled himself up and listened attentively to what the boy was saying. The particular one I was watching looked towards my window, and then burst out laughing. He slapped the boy on his back and resumed his walk. The boy went off slowly toward one of the houses. One or two of the other men came and stood near to the window looking up. I thought I would venture a bow, and made one rather ceremoniously. It didn't produce much effect, and I could not at the moment think of anything I could do that would show them quite clearly that I saw them. They went on looking at me quietly enough. Then I heard a low, deep bell, seemingly quiet enough, far off, and it tolled 5 times. They heard it too, turned sharply round, and walked off to the houses. Soon after that, the lights in the windows died down, and everything became very still. I looked at my watch to find that it was 10 o'clock. I waited for a while to see if anything would happen, but there was nothing, so I got some books out, which took a few minutes, and before I settled down to them, I thought I would make one more look out of the window. Where were all the little houses? At first glance, I thought they had vanished, but it was not exactly so. I could still see the chimneys above. That's not what I do. I could still see the chimneys above the grass, but as I looked, they too disappeared. It was done very neatly. There was no hole, but the turf closed in upon the roofs as they sank down, just as if it was of india rubber. There was not a trace left of houses or roads or playgrounds or anything. I was strongly tempted to go out and walk over the side of the village, but I did not. For one thing, I was afraid I might disturb the people of the house, and besides, there was a mist coming up over the meadows which sloped away outside the garden, so I stopped where I was. But what a very odd mist, I began to think. It wasn't coming in all one piece as it should. It was more in patches or even pillars of a smoky gray, which moved at different rates, some of them occasionally standing still, others seeming to go to and fro. And now I began to hear something like a hollow whispering coming from their direction. It wasn't conversation, for it went on quite continuously in the same tone. It sounded as more if like something was being recited. I didn't like it. And I saw what I liked even less. 7 of these pillars of mist, just about the size of a man, were standing in a row just outside the garden fence, and in each I thought I saw 2 dull red eyes. And that hollow whispering grew louder. Just then I heard a noise behind me in the room, as if the fire irons had suddenly fallen down. And so they had, and the reason why they had was that an old horseshoe which was on the mantelpiece had, for no reason I could see, tumbled over and knocked them. Something I had heard come into my mind. I took the horseshoe and laid it on the window sill. The pillars of mist swayed and quivered as if a sudden gust of wind had struck them, and seemed all at once to go farther off, and the hollow murmur was no longer to be heard. I shut the window and go to bed. But last thing, I looked out once again. The meadow was clear of mist and bright beneath the light of the moon. As I lay in bed, I thought and thought over what I had seen last. I was quite sure that the pillars of mist concealed some beings that wished me no good. But why should they have any spite against me? I was also sure they wanted to get into the house, but again, why? You may think I was slow in the wits, but I confess there some few minutes passed before I had guessed it. Of course they wanted to get a hold of the box with the 5 jars. The thought disturbed me so much that I got up, lit a candle, and went to the cupboard to see if it all was safe. Yes, the box was there, but the cupboard door, which I knew had been locked, was unfastened. When I had to turn the key, it became plain that the lock was hampered and useless. How could this have come about? Earlier in the evening it was perfectly right, and nobody had been in the room since I locked it last. Whatever had done it, they made the cupboard no safe place for the box. I took it into the bedroom, and after a minute's thought, cleared out a space in a suitcase which I had brought with me, locked it in that, and put the key on the ring of my watch chain. Watch and all went under my pillow, and once more I got into bed. As I lay in bed and thought over what I had seen last, I was quite sure that the pillars of mist concealed some beings that wished me no good, but why should they have any spite against me? I was also sure they wanted to get into the house, but again, why? You may think I was slow in the wits, but I confess that some minutes passed before I guessed it. Of course they wanted to get a hold of the box with the 5 jars. The thought, it disturbed me so much that I got up, lit a candle, and went to the cupboard to see if it all was safe. Yes, the box was there, but the cupboard door... Did that... Is that on the page multiple times, or did I just lose my place there? Oh, brain smooth. Anyway, how could this have come about? Earlier in the evening it had been perfectly right, and nobody had been in the room since I locked it last. Whoever had done it had made the cupboard no safe place for the box. I took it into the bedroom, and after a minute's thought, cleared out a space in a suitcase which I had brought with me. Oh no, that was there twice. Huh. Or maybe I mashed buttons. I was so sure. I'm like, man, that's weird. Why was it printed twice? Is the author trying to give me, the reader, deja vu? I read a story with a deja vu in it, so I thought I had lost my place. I backed up, and it did it again. Honestly, that's what I thought this was doing to me. Was trying to, like, reinforce how strange the things that are happening to this guy is. That he, like, locks it up, and then, like, he locks it up in the little suitcase, and then like goes back to bed, and then he wakes up and it's once again in the unlocked cabinet, and like these fog pillars and the people who live in the grass were just messing with him. See, this is a very curious little book that I might have a little bit of insight on, and it actually, I'm beginning to think as I'm reading this one is this was what I was originally planning on reading, and I got a wire crossed. And I opened Ishtar a little early. Because I do actually want to read Ishtar. I just want to I want to get a sense of the context that book is in. Uh, I somehow got the phrase "the 5 jars of Ishtar" in my head, and I think that's how I got to that book earlier. Anyway, let's crunch. Let's dive into chapter 4, shall we? The small people. You will have made sure that the next jar that I meant to try was the one for the tongue, in hopes that it. Oh, excuse me. The next jar that I meant to try was the one for the tongue, in hopes that it would help me speak to some of the creatures. And though I looked forward to the experiment very much, and felt somewhat restless until I had made it, I did get a good deal of amusement out of what I saw and heard the next day. The small people were not to be seen, at least not in the morning. No, I'm wrong. I found a bunch of 3 of them, young ones, asleep in a hollow tree. They woke up and looked at me without much interest, and when I was withdrawing my head, they blew kisses to me. I'm afraid there's no doubt they did so in derision, but there were others. I passed a cottage garden in which a little dog was barking most furiously. He seemed to be barking at a clothesline, on which, with a lot of other things, there was a print dress with a rather startling pattern of flowers. The dress caught my eye, and so did something red at the top, which stuck up above the line. I gave it another glance, and really I had the most dreadful shock. It was a face. I gazed at it in horror, and was just gathering my wits to run and call for help or something, when I saw that it was laughing. Then I realized it couldn't be an ordinary person, hanging as it was on a thin bit of cord and blowing to and fro in the breeze. I went nearer, staring at it with all my eyes, and made out that it was the face of an old woman, very cheerful and ruddy, and, as I had said, laughing and swinging to and fro. Suddenly she seemed to catch my eye and to see that I saw her, and in a flash she was off the line and round the corner of the house, nearly tumbling over the dog as she went. It rushed after her, still very angry, but soon came trotting back, rather out of breath, and that incident was over. And so I walked on. Among the village people I met, there were 1 or 2 of them whom I didn't think I had seen before. Elderly, bright-eyed people they were, who seemed very much surprised when I said good morning to them, and stopped still, looking after me, when I passed on. At last, some little way outside the village, I saw in the distance the same bright-colored dress that had been on the clothesline. The person who wore it was going slowly, and looking in the grass and hedges, sometimes stooping to pick a plant, as it seemed. I quickened my pace, and came up with her, and when I was just behind her, I cleared my throat rather loudly, and said, "Fine day," or perhaps some other words to that effect. You should have seen her jump. I was well paid for the fright she'd given me just before. However, the startled look cleared away from her face, and she drew herself up and looked at me very calmly. "Yes, it's a fine day." And she actually blushed and went on, "Oh. Magnus has decided to page a long way forward. Where was I? "Yes, it's a fine day." Then she actually blushed and went on, "I think I ought to beg your pardon for giving you such a turn just now." Well, I was certainly a good deal startled, but no harm was done. The dog took it more to heart than I did. She gave a short laugh at this. "Yes, I hardly know why I was behaving like that. I suppose we all of us feel skittish at times." She paused and said with some little hesitation, "You have them, I suppose?" And at the same time she rapidly touched her ears, eyes, and mouth with her forefinger. I looked at her in some doubt, for I thought, might not she be one of the unknown who wished to get a hold of those 5 jars? But her eye was honest, and my instinct was to trust her, so I nodded and put my finger on my lips. "Oh, of course. Well, you're the first since I was a little thing. That's 1400 years ago." You may think that opened my eyes. Yes, Vitalis was the last, and he lived in the villa. They called it so down by the stream. You'll find the place some of those days if you look. I heard talk yesterday. Someone had got them, and I'm told the mist was about last night. Perhaps you saw it. Yes, I did, and I guessed what it meant. And I told her all that had happened, and ended by asking if she could kindly advise me what to do. She thought for a moment, then handed me a little bunch of the leaves she held in her hand. Oh, 4-leaf clovers. I know nothing better. Lay it on the box itself. You'll hear of them again, be sure. Who are they? I asked in a whisper. She shook her head at this. Not allowed, was all she would say. I must be going. And she was gone, sure enough. You might suppose, as I did when I came to think of it, that my new sight ought to have been able to see what became of her. I think it would if she had gone straight away from me, but what I believe she did was to dart round behind me and then go away in a straight line, so I was left looking in front of me while she was traveling away behind me like a bullet from a gun. You need practice with these things, and I'd only been at it a couple days. Uh-oh, gang. Uh-oh. This guy has taken a gift from uh, a particular source, if this is what I think it is. And that never ends well. I turned and walked rather quickly homewards, for I thought it would be wise to protect my box as soon as possible now that I had the means. I think it was fortunate that I did. As I opened the garden gate, I saw an old woman coming down the path, an old woman very unlike the last. Old was not the word for her face. She might have been born before the history books began. As to her expression, if you ever saw a snake with red rims to its eyes and the expression of a parrot, well, you might have some idea of it. She was hobbling along with a stick, in quite the proper manner, but I felt certain that all was put on, that she could have glided as swift as an adder if she pleased. I confess I was afraid of her. I had a feeling that she knew everything and hated everybody. And what, as I suddenly thought, has she been up to? If she's got that box, where am I? More than that, what mischief will she and her company work among the small people, the birds, and the beasts? There'd be no mercy for them. A glance at her eye told me that. It was an immense relief to see that she could not possibly have gotten the box about her, and another relief when my eye traveled to the door of the house and saw no fewer than 3 horseshoes nailed above it. I smiled to myself. How angry she looked. But she had to act her part with feeble curtsies, and in a very small, hoarse, trembling voice, she wished me a good day, though I noticed her pointing to the ground with her thumb as she said the words, and would be very obliged if I could tell her the right time. I was going to pull out my watch, and if I had, she would have seen a certain key that we know of, when something said suddenly and clearly to my brain, "Look out," and by good luck I heard a clock inside the house strike 1 before I could answer. Oh, just struck 1, was my reply accordingly, and I said it as innocently as I could. She drew her breath in hard and quivered all over, and her mouth remained open like a cat's when it was using its worst expressions, and when she eventually thanked me, I leave it to you to imagine how gracefully she did it. Well, she had no more cards to play at the moment, and no excuse for remaining, so I stood my ground and watched her out of the gate. A path led down the meadow, and much against her will, no doubt, she had to keep up the pretense and toil painfully along it until she reached another hedge and could reckon on being out of my sight. After that, I neither saw nor expected to see anything more of her. I went up to my room and found it's all safe, laid the 4-leaf clover on the box. At luncheon, I took my occasion to find out from the maid, without asking her in so many words, whether the old woman had been visible to her. Evidently she had not. Evidently, also, the evil creatures were really on the track of the 5 jars, knew that I had them, and had a very fair idea of where they were kept. However, if the maid had not seen her, the cat had, and murmured a good deal to herself, and was in a rather nervous state. She sat with her ears turned different ways on the window-sill, looking out and twitching her back uncomfortably, like an old lady who feels a draught. A draft, rather. When I was available, she came and sat on my knee, a very uncommon attention on her part, with that air half of wishing to be protected and half of wishing to protect me. If there's fish tonight," I said, "you shall have some." But I was not yet in a position to make myself understood. Oh, Pussycat's been sleeping on your box all the afternoon, sir, said the maid when I came in to tea. I couldn't get her to come off, and when I did turn her out of the room, I do believe she climbed up and got in again by the window. I don't mind at all. Let her be there if she likes. And indeed I felt quite grateful to the cat. I don't know that she could have done much had there been any attempt on the box, but I was sure her intentions were good. There was fish that evening. She had a good deal of it. She didn't say much that I could follow, but chiefly sang songs without words. There's a little intermission thing here. Not to go over the preliminaries again, I did, when the proper time came, touch my tongue with the contents of the third jar. I found that it worked in this way. I could not hear what I was saying myself when I was talking to an animal. I only thought the remark very clearly, and then I felt my tongue and lips moving in an old fashion, an odd fashion even, which I can't describe. But with the small people in human shape it was different. I spoke in the ordinary way to them, and though I dare say my voice went up an octave or two, I can't say I perceived it. The village was there again tonight, and the life going on in it seemed much the same. I was set upon making acquaintance in a natural sort of way with the people, and as it would not do to run any risk of startling them, I just took my place near the window and made some pretense of playing patience. I thought it likely that some of the young people would come and watch me, in spite of the fright they'd had the night before, and it was not long before I heard a rustling in the shrubs under the window and the voices saying, "Is he in there? Oh, can you see? Oh, don't look out, you all but had me over that time." They were suddenly quiet after this, and apparently one must have, very cautiously, climbed up and looked into the room. When he got down again, there was a great fuss. "No, is he really? What do you say he was doing? What sort of charm?" "I say, do you think we better get down?" "No, but really, what is he doing?" "Laying out rows of flat things on the table with marks on them." "I don't believe it." "Well, you go and look yourself." "All right, I shall." "Yes, but I say, do look out. Suppose you get shut in and we're late for the bell." "Oh, you fool, I shan't go into the room. Only stop on the window sill." "Well, I don't know, but I believe he saw us last night, and my father said he thought so too." "Oh, well, he can't move very quick anyway. He's some way off the window. I'll go up." I managed, without alerting my position too much, to keep my eye on the window sill, and sure enough, in a second or two, a small round head came into sight. I went on with my game. At first I could see that the watcher was ready to duck down at the slightest provocation, but as I took no sort of notice, he gained confidence, and leaned his elbows on the sill, and then actively pulled himself up and sat down on it. He bent over and whispered to the others below, and it was not long before I saw a whole row of heads filling up the window sill from end to end. There must have been a dozen. I thought the time was come, and without moving, in as careless a tone as I could, I said, "Come in, gentlemen. Come in. Don't be shy." There was a rustle, and two or three heads disappeared, but nobody said anything. "Come in if you like. You can hear the bell quite well from here. I shan't shut the window." "You promise?" "I promise, honor bright." Whereupon he made the plunge. First he dropped on to the seat of a chair by the window, and from that to the floor. Then he wandered about the room, keeping at a distance from me at first, and I have no doubt watching very anxiously to see whether I had an intention of pouncing on it. The others followed, first one by one, and then two or three at a time. Some remained sitting on the window sill, but most plucked up courage to get down on the floor and explore. I had now my first good chance of seeing what they were like. They all wore the same fashion of clothes, a tunic and close-fitting hose and flat caps, seemingly very much what a boy would have worn in Queen Elizabeth's time. The colors were sober, dark blue, dark red, gray, brown. Each one's clothes were of one color all through. They had some white linen underneath that showed a little at the neck, but there were both fair and dark among them, all clean and passably good-looking, one or two certainly handsome even. The first comer was ruddy and auburn-haired and evidently a leader. They called him Wag. I heard whispers from the corner of the room, and appeals to Wag to explain what this and that unfamiliar object was, and noticed that he was never at a loss for an answer of some kind, correct or not. The fireplace, which had its summer dressing, was, it appeared, a rock garden. An old letter lying on the floor was a charm. Better not touch it. The waste paper basket, not unnaturally, was a prison. The pattern on the carpet was...
Oh, you wouldn't understand if I was to tell you.
Soon enough, a voice, Wag's voice, came from somewhere near my foot.
I say, can I get up on the top?
I offered to lift him, but he declined rather hastily and said my leg would be all right if I didn't mind putting it out a bit, slopingly. Then he ran up on it. He ran up it, on all fours. He was quite a perceptible weight. Got onto my table from my knee without any difficulty. Once there was a great deal to interest him. Books, papers, inks, pens, pipes, matches, cards. He was full of questions about them, and his being so much at ease encouraged the others to follow him, so that before very long the whole lot were perambulating the table and making me very nervous lest I should fall off, while Wag was standing close up to me and putting me through a catechism.
What do you have such little spears for?
He wanted to know, brandishing a pen at me.
That blood on the end? Whose blood? Well, what do you do with it then? Well, let's see, only that?
When I wrote a word or two.
Oh, well, you can tell me about it another time. Now I want to know what these clubs in the chest are.
Oh, we make fire with them. If you like, I'll show you, but it makes a little noise.
Go on,
said Wag, and I struck a match, rather expecting a stampede, but no, they were quite unmoved, and Wag said,
beastly rowan smell. Why don't you do the ordinary way?
He brushed the palm of his left hand along the tips of the fingers on his right hand, put them to his lips, and then to his eyes, and behold, his eyes began to glow from behind with a light which would have been quite bright enough for him to read by.
Quite simple, don't you know it?
Then he did the same thing in reverse order, touching eyes, lips, and hand, and the light was gone. I didn't like to confess that this was beyond me. Yes, that's all very well, but how do you manage about your houses? I'm sure I saw lights in the windows.
Of course, put as many as you want.
Then he ran round the table, dabbing his hand here or there on the cloth, or anything that lay on it, and at every place a little round bud or drop of very bright light, but also soft light, came out.
See?
He said, darting round again, passing his hands over the lights and touching his lips, and they were gone. He came back and said,
It's a much better way. It's a much better way. It is really.
As if it were the only my native stupidity that prevented me from using it myself. A smaller one, who'd looked up to me rather quieter sort than Wag, had come up and was standing by him. He said now in a low voice,
Perhaps I can't.
It seemed a new idea to Wag. He made his eyes very round.
Can't? All right, it's quite simple.
The other shook his head and pointed to my hand, which rested on the table. Wag looked at it too, then at my face.
Can I see that spread out?
Oh, yes, if you promise not to spoil it. He laughed slightly, and then both he and the other, whom he called Slim, bent over and looked closely at the tips of my fingers.
Other side, please,
he said after a time, and then they subjected my nails to a like examination. The others, who had been at the remoter part of the table, wandered up and looked over their shoulders. After tapping my nails and lifting up one or more fingers, Wag stood upright and said,
I suppose it's true and you can't. I thought your sort could do anything.
Oh, well, I thought much the same about you. I always thought you could fly, but you...
Oh, so we can,
said Wag very sharply, and his face grew red. Oh, then why haven't you been doing it tonight? He kicked one foot with the other and looked quickly at Slim. The rest said nothing and edged away, humming to themselves.
Oh, we can fly perfectly well, only...
Not tonight, I suppose.
Oh, no, not tonight. You needn't laugh either. We'll soon show you.
That'll be nice. When will you show me?
Let's see.
He turned to Slim at this.
2 nights more, isn't it? All right, then. In 2 nights more, you'll see.
Just then, a moth flew in, caused a welcome diversion, for I could see that somehow I had touched on a sore subject. He was feeling awkward, and he first jumped at it and then ran after it. Slim lingered, so I raised my eyebrows and pointed at Wag. Slim nodded.
The fact is,
he said in a low voice,
he got us into rather a row yesterday, and we've all stopped flying for 3 nights.
Oh, I see. You must tell him I'm very sorry for being so stupid. May I ask who stopped you?
Oh, just the old man, not the owls.
You trying to do the owls? You do go to the owls for something, then?
Yes, history and geography.
Oh, to be sure. Of course, they've seen a lot, haven't they?
So they say, but...
Then the low toll of the bell wafted through the window. There was an instant scurry to the edge of the table, then to the seat of the chair, and up the window sill. Small arms waved caps at me. The shrubs rustled, and I was left alone once more. Oh. Chapter 5. Danger to the Jars. Now my ears and eyes and tongue had been dealt with, and what remained were the forehead and the chest. I could not guess what would come of treating these with the ointment, but I thought I would try the forehead first. There was still a day or two when the moon would be bright enough for the trial. I hoped that perhaps the effect of these last 2 jars might be to make me able to go on with my experiences, to keep in touch with the new people I'd come across during the time when the moon, was out of sight. I had one anxiety, however. The precious box must be guarded from those who were after it. About this I had a conviction. If I could keep them off until I had used each of the 5 jars, the box and I would then be safe. Why I felt sure of this I couldn't say, but my experience had led me to trust these beliefs that came into my head, and I meant to trust this one. It'd be best, I thought, if I did not go far from the house, perhaps even if I didn't leave it at all till the time of the danger was past. Several things happened in the course of the morning which confirmed me in my belief. I took up a position at the table by the window of my sitting room. I had put the box in my suitcase, which I had locked, and now laid it beside me where I could keep an eye upon it. The view from my window showed me, at first, the garden of the cottage, with its lawn and little flower beds, its hedge and back gate, and beyond that a path leading down across a field. More fields, I knew, came after that one, and sloped pretty sharply down to a stream in the valley which I couldn't see, but I could see the steep slope of the fields, partly pasture, and then clothed with green woods toward the top. There were no other houses in sight. The road was behind me, passing the front of the cottage, and my bedroom looked out that way. I had some writing and reading to do, and I had not long finished breakfast before I settled down to it, and heard the maid doing out the bedroom as usual, accompanied every now and then by a slight mew from the cat, who, as usual, was watching her at work. These mews meant nothing in particular. I may say they were only intended to be met by an encouraging remark, such as,
"Oh, there you are then, pussycat. Don't get in my way now, or all in good time."
Finally I heard,
"Come along then, let's see what we've got for you downstairs."
and the door was shut. I mention this because of what happened about a quarter of an hour later. There was suddenly a fearful crash in the bedroom, a fall, a breaking of glass and crockery, and snapping of wood, then fainter, sobbings and groans of pain. I started up. Goodness, she must have been dusting that heavy shelf high up on the wall with all the china on it. The whole thing's given way. She must be badly hurt. Why doesn't her mistress come rushing upstairs? And what was that rasping noise just beside me? I looked at my suitcase, which lay on the table just inside the open window. Across the new, smooth top of it, there were 3 deep scratches running toward the window, which hadn't been there before. I moved it to the other side of me and sat down. There'd been an attempt to decoy me out of the room, and it had failed. Certainly, there would be more. I waited, but everything was quiet in the house. No more noise from the bedroom, and no one moving about, upstairs or downstairs. Nothing but the pump clanking in the scullery. I turned to my work again. Half an hour must have gone by, and though on the lookout, I wasn't fidgety. Then I was aware of a confused noise from the field outside.
"Help! Help! Keep off, you brute! Help, you there!"
As well as I could make out again and again. Towards the far end of the field, which was a pretty large one, a poor old man was trying to get to a gate in the hedge at a staggering run, and striking now and then with his stick at a great deerhound which was leaping up to him with hollow barks. It seemed as if nothing but the promptest dash to the spot might save him. It seemed, too, that if he'd caught sight of the window, if he'd caught sight of me at the window, for he beckoned, how strange the cries sounded. It was as if someone was shouting into an empty jug. My field glasses were by me on the look by the table, and I thought I would take just one look before I rushed out. And I'm glad I did, for did you know that when I had the glasses focused on the fizz of dancing super, much as if the shimmering air that you see on the heath of a hot day had glittered up and rolled in, or gathered up and rolled into a shape, said I, as I put down the glasses, and something in the air about 4 yards off made a sharp hissing sound. No doubt there were words, but I doubt I could distinguish them. The second attempt has failed. You may be sure I was well on the alert for the next. I put away my book now and sat looking out the window, wondering as I watched whether there was anything out of the common to be noticed. For one thing, I thought there were more little birds about than I expected. At first I didn't see them, for they were not hopping about on the lawn, but as I stared at the hedge of the garden and that of the field, I became aware that these were full of life. On every twig that could hold a bird in shelter, not on top of the hedges, a bird was sitting, quite still, and were all looking toward the video, as if, or toward the window rather, as if they were expecting something to happen there. Occasionally one would flutter its wings a little and turn its head toward its neighbor, but this was all it did. I picked up my glasses and began to study the bottom of the hedges and the bushes where there was some quantity of dead leaves, and here too I could see that there were spectators. A small bright eye or a bit of nose was visible almost everywhere I looked. In short, the mice, and I don't doubt some of the rats, hedgehogs, and toads as well, were collected there, and were as intently on the watch as the birds. What a chance for the cat! If only she knew. I put my head cautiously out of the window, and looking down on the sill of the window below, I could see her head, with her ears pushed forward. She was looking earnestly at the hedge, but she didn't move. Only at the slight noise that I had made did she turn her face upwards and crow to me in a modest but encouraging manner. Time passed. Luncheon was held on another table, and was over before anything else happened. The next thing was that I heard the maid saying, sharply,
"What business have you got going round to the back? We don't want none of your rubbish here."
a hoarse voice answered inaudibly.
"No, nor the gentlemen don't want none of your stuff neither. How do you know there's a gentleman here at all, I should like to know? What? Don't mean to offence, I dare say. That's more than I know. Well, that's the last word I've got to say."
In a minute there was more than a knock at my door, and at the same time a step on the gravel path under my window and a loud hiss from the cat. As I said come in to the knock, I briefly looked out the window, but saw nothing. It was the maid who had knocked. She came to ask if I should want anything from the village, or if anything I should like before tea time, because, well, the mistress was going out, and wanted her to go over and fetch something from the shop. I said there was nothing except the letters and perhaps a small parcel from the post office. She lingered for a moment before going, and finally said,
"You'll excuse me about naming it, sir, but there seems to be some funny people going about the roads today. If you'd please to be what I mean to say a bit on the lookout, as if you're not going out around yourself."
"Oh, certainly, don't mean to go out. By the way, who was it that came to the door just now?"
"Oh, that was one of these walking men, not one I've seen before. Must be a stranger in this part, I think, for he began going around to the garden door, only I've stopped him. He's got those cheap rubbishing hatpins and whatnot. Leastways, if you understand me, what I thought to myself was shouldn't like to be seen with him, whereas others might."
Yes, I see," I answered, and she went. I turned to my books once more. Within a very few minutes, I began to suspect that I was getting sleepy. Yes, it was undoubtedly so. What with the warmth of the day and lunch and not having been out, there was a curious smell in the room. Not exactly nasty like something burning. What did it remind me of? Wood smoke from a cottage fire that one smells on an autumn evening as one comes bicycling down the hill into a village. Not so quite as my offence, I dare say. There's more than I know. Well, that's the last word I've got to say. In a minute, there was a knock at my door, and at the same time, a step on the gravel path underneath my window. A loud hiss from the cat. As I said, "Come in," to the knock, I hastily looked out of the window, but saw nothing. It was the maid who had knocked. She had come to ask if there was anything I should like from the village, or anything I should want before tea time, to go over and fetch something from the shop. I said there was nothing except the letters and perhaps a small parcel from the post office. She lingered a moment before going, and finally said, "You'll excuse me naming it, sir, but there seems to be some funny people about the roads today. If you'd please to be what I mean, being on the lookout in case you're not going out." Uh, did I just do the deja vu thing again? My brain's melting. Walking men, yeah, we definitely read the bit about the walking men. Within a few minutes, I began to suspect that I was getting sleepy. Yes, it was undoubtedly so. With the warmth of the day and lunch and not having been out, there was a curious smell in the room. Not exactly nasty like something burning. What did it remind me of? Wood smoke from a cottage fire that one smells on an autumn evening as one comes bicycling down the hill in a village? Not quite so nice as that. Something more like a chemist's shop. I wondered, and as I wondered, my eyes closed. Head went forward. A sharp pain on the back of my hand, and a crash of glass. Up I jumped, and which of 3 or 4 things I recognized first, I did not know now. But I did realize in a second or two that my hand was bleeding from a scratch all down the back of it, that a pane of the window was broken, that the whole window was darkened with little birds that were bumping their chests against it. The cat was on the table gazing into my face with an intense expression. A little smoke was drifting into the room, that my suitcase was on the point of slipping out the windowsill. A despairing dash at it I made and managed to clutch it, but for the life of me I couldn't pull it back. I could see no string or cord, much less any hand that was dragging at it. I hardly dared to take my hand from it to catch something up and hack at the thief I could not see. Besides, there was nothing in reach. Then I remembered the knife in my pocket. Could I get it out and open it without losing hold? They hate steel, I thought. Somehow, frantically holding on with one hand, I got out the knife and opened it. Goodness knows how. It was horribly small and stiff, but I managed with my teeth, and sheared and stabbed indiscriminately all round the farther end of the suitcase. Thank goodness, the strain relaxed, so I got the thing inside the window, dropped it, and stood on it, craning over the garden path and round the corner of the house. Of course there was nothing to be seen. The birds were gone. The cat was still on the table, saying, "Oh, you owl! Oh, you owl!" The sole and only clue to what had been happening was a small earthenware saucer that lay on the path immediately below the window, with a little heap of ashes in it, from which a thin column of smoke was coming straight up and curling over when it reached the window level. That, I could not doubt, was the cause of my sudden sleepiness. I dropped a large book straight onto it, and had the satisfaction of hearing it crush to bits and then seeing the smoke go 4 ways along the ground and vanish. I was perfectly awake now. I looked at the cat and showed her the back of my hand. She sat quite still and said, "Oh, what did you expect? I had to do something. I'll lick it if you like, but I'd rather not. No particular feeling, you understand. All the same 100 years hence." I wasn't in a position to answer her, so I shook my head at her, wound up my hand in a handkerchief, and then stroked her. She took it agreeably, and jumped off the table, and requested to be let out. So that third attack had failed. I sat down and looked out. The hedges were empty, not a bird, not a mouse was left. I took this to mean that the dangerous time was past, and great was the relief. Soon I heard the maid come back from her errands in the village. Then the mistress's chaise. Then the clock, striking 5. I felt it would be all right for me to go out after tea. And so I did. First, however, concealing the suitcase in my bedroom, not that I supposed hiding it would be of much use, and piling upon it poker, tongs, knife, and a horseshoe, anything else I could find which I thought would keep off the trespassers. I had, by the way, to explain to the maid that a bird had flown against the window and broken it, and when she said, "Stupid, tiresome little things they are," I'm afraid I did not contradict her. Oh, that's not good. Sorry, I just got a Skype message from Raz, and there is a command line looking thing from her trying to turn on Lappy. Oh, that's her tower computer. I'll look at that at intermission. I'll tell her. I am currently attempting to resist the urge to look at that. Anyway. I went out by way of the garden and crossed the field, near the middle of which stands a large old oak. I went up to this for no particular reason, and stood gazing at the trunk. As I did so, I became aware that my eyes were beginning to see through, and behold, a family of owls was inside. As it was near evening, they were getting wakeful, stirring, smacking their beaks, opening their wings a little from time to time. At last, one of them said, "Time's dealing up, out and about, out and about. Anyone outside? No harm there." This short way of talking, I believe, was due to the owls not being properly awake, and consequently sulky. As they brightened up and got their eyes open, they began to be more easy in manner. "Oh, ho, ho, ho. I've had a very good day of it. You have too, Pope. Sound as a rock, I thank you, except when they were carrying on to the cottage. Oh, goodness, I forgot. They didn't bring it off, I hope." "Not they. The watch was too well set, but it was wanted. I had a leaf about it a few minutes after. Seems they got him asleep." "Well, I've never heard anyone bring a leaf." "I dare say not. I was expecting it. Pigeon dropped it. There it is, on the child's back." I saw the hen owl stoop and examine a dead chestnut leaf which lay, as the other had said, on an owlet's back. "Father," said the owlet suddenly in a shrill voice, "mayn't I go out tonight?" But all that the father did was to clasp its head in its claw and push it to and fro several times. When he let go, the owlet made no sound, but crept away and hid its face in a corner, and heaved as if with sobs. Father closed his eyes slowly, and opened them slowly. Amused, I thought. The mother had been reading the leaf all the time. "Dear me, very interesting. I suppose now the worst of it's over." "All's quiet for tonight anyhow," said Father. "But I wish she would see someone about tomorrow. That's their last chance, and they may." He ruffled up his feathers, lifted first one foot and then the other. "The awkwardness is, if I say too much and they do get the jars, well, there's one risk. And if there's no warning and they get them, there's another risk." "But if there is a warning and they don't get them," said she very sensibly, "well, to be sure, that would be better, even though we don't know much about him. But where do you suppose he is, when he ought, and whom he ought to be?" It was just what I wanted to know, and I thanked her. "Why, as to the first, I expect he's outside. There's someone there. Why they should stop here all this time, unless they're listening, I don't know. Goodness gracious, listening to our private conversation. With me, my feathers are all anyhow." She began to peck at herself vigorously, but this was straying from the point and annoyed me. However, the father went slowly on. "As to that, I don't much care whether he's listening or not. As to whom he ought to see, that's rather more difficult. He's got as far as talking to any of the right people," he said this as if they had capital letters,
They'd know, of course, and some of them down about the village, they'd know, and the old mother knows, and what about the boys? Said she, pausing in the middle of her toilet and poking her head up at him. He wholly disdained to answer, and merely butted at her with his head, so that she slipped down off her ledge several inches with a great scrabbling. Oh, don't, she said peevishly, as she climbed back up. I'm all untidy again. Well, then don't ask such ridiculous questions. I shall baffle you with both wings next time, and now, as soon as the coast is clear, I shall be out and about. I took the hint and moved off, for I had learnt as much, perhaps, as I could expect, even if all was not yet plain. And before I had gone many paces, I was aware of the pair both sailing smoothly off in the opposite direction. I was seeing through a good deal of things that evening. It's surprising what a lot of coppers people drop, even on a field path. Surprising, too, in how many places there lie, unsuspected, the bones of men. Some things I saw which were ugly and sad like that, but more that were amusing and even exciting. There's one spot I could show where 4 gold cups stand round what once was there's one spot that I could show where 4 gold cups stand round what was once a book, but the book's no more than earth now. That, however, I did not see on this particular evening. What I remember best is a family of young rabbits huddled round their parents in a burrow, and the mother telling a story. And so then he went a little farther and found a dandelion and stopped and sat up to begin to eat it. And when he'd eaten 2 large leaves and 1 little one, he saw a fly on it. No, 2 flies. Then he thought he had had enough of that dandelion, and he went a little farther and found another dandelion. And so it went on interminably and entirely stupid, like everything else I've ever heard a rabbit say, for they've all forgotten about their ancestor Briar Rabbit. However, the children were absorbed in the story, so much so that they never heard a stoat making its way down the burrow. But I heard it, and by stamping and driving my stick in, I was able to make it turn tail and go off cursing. All stoats, weasels, ferrets, polecats, they're of the wrong people, as you may imagine, and so are most rats and bats. I could picture a rat or a bat being pretty uncouth, that's fair. As at last I went off, seeing through by trying not to do so, and went back to the house, where I found all safe and quiet. I ought to say that I had not as yet tried speaking to any animals, even to the cat when she scratched me, but I thought I would try it now. So when she came in at dinner time and circled about, with what I may call pious aspirations about fish and other such things, I summoned up my courage and said, using my voice in the way I'd described, rather didn't describe before, I used to be told if you're hungry you could eat dry bread. Well, she was certainly horribly startled. At first I thought she would have dashed up the chimney or out the window, but she recovered pretty quickly and sat down, still looking at me with intense surprise. I suppose you might have guessed, but dear, what a turn did you give me. I feel quite faint and gracious what a day has been. When I found you dozing off like a great... Well, no one wants to be rude, do they? But I can tell you, I had more than half a mind to go at your face. I'm glad you didn't, and really, it wasn't my fault. It was that stuff they were burning on the path. I know that well enough, but to come back to the point, all this anxiety has made me empty in myself as a clean saucer. Just what I was saying. If you're hungry, you can... Say that again. Say it just once more. And her eyes grew narrow as she said it. And I shall... Oh, what shall you do? I asked, for she stopped herself suddenly. And she calmed down. Well, you know how it is when one's been all excited like and worked up. We all say more than we mean, but about dry bread, well, simply I can't bear it. That's a wicked, cruel untruth, that's what it is. Besides, you can't be going to eat the whole of what she's going to put down for you. Excitement was coming on again, and she ended with a loud, ill-tempered Well, I gave her what she seemed to want, and shortly after, worn out doubtless with the fatigues of the day, she went to sleep on a chair, not even caring to follow the maid downstairs when the things were cleared away. Alright, folks, I am going to take intermission. We will be right back. I need to get the sleeping powder out of my eyes. I don't know where they left the dish, and I probably don't have the wherewithal to
find it, but I'm a little sleepy. Uh, I'm beginning to think those two little deja vu moments I had were me accidentally hitting up to go back a page when I meant to hit right to go forward one. Anyway, like the BRB says, now is a great time to stretch, get some hydration, take your necessary meds, uh, pet your animals. If you're gonna pet your animals, definitely say so in the Discord and maybe send some images my way. I love to see people's pets. It's always so lovely. We'll be back in about 15 minutes. Biggest thing for me is grabbing some water and petting my pets. Keep one eye on the stream. Like I said, we will be back. Nobody panic. No, we're not starting soon. We'll be right back. Okay. Let me make sure nothing explodes. Yeah, library. Provided nothing explodes, I can also show you how library is bullying me right now. Yup. Look at this man. Observe this man. Oh, I'm sorry. Am I not petting you? Am I not petting you enough? Is Dad so mean to you, huh? You sit there and you lay in the way the whole time I am reading initially? Oh, ow. Oh, yes. No one love you? Huh? No one pet you? No one pay you a single mind? Hmm? He says, Dad, you need to take a break. Pet me. Yeah. Don't nobody love you, kitty? Huh? Don't nobody pet you? You can't do that. You can't reach up and grab my hand like that. It'll startle me. And then I won't be able to pet you right that second when you need it. I hope you all can see what this man is doing. Yeah, he's in shot. He's also trying to eat the couch. I wouldn't suggest that. You know where the couch is. Hey, you know where the couch has been. Don't eat that. What even is that? It's not there anymore. I must have spilled some sourdough starter or something. Very spill prone in this house. Whether it's me actually spilling something or whether it's this one puking. God, he puked on one of the scratch mats today. You wouldn't believe how many times I have to replace scratch mats early. Oh, did you see him punch at me? See his little paw? Like, no, don't tell the internet what I did. Too bad, kitty. They've been told. Gosh, this is taking long to boil. Oh, I didn't come back fast enough. And so now we're sitting here waiting for the water to boil so I can make myself more tea. Yeah. Don't nobody love you, huh? Don't nobody pet you? Yeah. Don't nobody care for you? Oh. Take it easy, Mr. Fists. Why are we in a boxing mood tonight? Hmm? Oh, why are we in such a boxing mood tonight? Can I pick you up and let you purr for the mic instead? How about that? What if I pick you up and I put you up close to the microphone? Ah, yeah. You know, I should have saw that coming. Hopefully you all could hear him for that little moment before he started attacking the little towel. Hi. You can tap me to get your attention all get my attention all you like. Your brother knows how exactly to do that. But you gotta let my hand come down naturally. You know, maybe what if I try this? Put down my hand like this and then bring it up to you, huh? Perhaps that's the issue. Perhaps you see the hand coming down at you and you go, oh, pet, and you try to grab. Maybe if I put it down where you can't grab and then pet you. Maybe we're just too excited with the concept of pets? Perhaps. Here, let's give it a try since you're all bound up. Oh, no. No, that's not the answer. He did neglect to use his claws that time, which I appreciated greatly. Hi. I just told you I can sit on my phone charger, that's for sure. Can I just hold you? Can I just have you be a little lap man? Lap, lap, lap. Hmm? See, this is what I do when I don't need water. When I don't need water uh, between intermission, I just sit here and do this. I just sit here and talk to my cat and give him his pets. And it depends on the day. Sometimes I won't be talking to the cat if my throat's particularly tired. Sir, I'm gonna need you to not eat the keyboard. I know it looks very tasty and very interesting, but you cannot be eating the keyboard. Whoa! Oh, what's up? We had something in our little eye there for a second. You okay? Okay. Did I just irritate your ear a little bit? Huh? Little man. Little man. Also, for the fans on TikTok, here, have some doubloons. He's like, I didn't do it. See, that's normally what I do to the cats when they're being bad. So the library's just like, what did I just do? I didn't do it. I've been framed. But that's for the fans on TikTok. Have some doubloons. That's still popular, right? I have no idea how TikTok works, to be honest with you. I know it's like 99% like algorithmically driven. You know, you just sit there on your For You page and you look for the next pile of dopamine. But I'm just not built that way. And like, I think part of what's been sucking me into TikTok so much lately is just trying to catch up on all of the like stuff I missed from the people I follow. And also like several people I follow have just evaporated. So like and like I'm trying to, wield the algorithm of the For You page, kind of like bend it into a shape that is things I like instead of just this is what's popular. So, TikTok. If you can't tell, I'm not particularly enthused that I am doing TikTok. I feel that a lot of my stuff does not, Papercuts in particular, I feel does not suit that sort of, short form thinking. And I have a plan, and I'll get there, but not a lot of what I do, I feel, kind of does fits in that little short form bubble very well. So I have to kind of, I pause as I'm talking a lot, for example. So I have to cut all those little pauses out. No, that's okay, Mr. Green, Mr. Hank Green. We don't need to hear your evidences on things, much as I would be interested in what you're talking about. Yes, yes. No one loved the poor library cat, do they? Huh. I should just post that on TikTok when I'm like, no, 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 we don't need to eat the keyboard. When I'm just like about to go live, be like, oh, no one loved the library cat. Come to stream, give library his love. I might do that as a stream announcement sometime, actually. Now we wait around for 4 minutes for the tea. How's you all's night been? I'm sorry about the book initially. Like I said, I got a wire crossed. I was like, oh yeah, the jars of Ishtar. No, it was just the 5 jars. I got my wires crossed. Oh yes. Yes, lovely little pets. We're making very aggressive little biscuits. Those might not even be biscuits. That might just be him grabbing the couch because I'm overstimulating him. Are these too much for you? Here, I will just let you flop over. You just gonna lay on the couch? Oh, Guriki is currently live right now. He is What's he doing? Is he playing a game with someone? He's playing a game with someone. Why do you have your stream... Why do you have Gutenberg in your title if you're not reading? Yeah, whatever. See, this is why I don't open my phone. You see what I'm doing right here? I'm looking at my phone, and I'm being like, huh, there's things on my phone. Library's trying to type stuff. Hey, bud, I appreciate it, but you need thumbs to type things, and you are woefully lacking in thumbs, my good man. No, I wouldn't eat the phone charger while I'm at it either. I know, I'm no fun. I don't let you do anything. I am so mean, aren't I? I am so mean to the little kitty cat. I don't let him eat the couch. I don't let him eat the phone charger. So mean. I am just so unthinkingly cruel to my little kitty cats. Don't let him eat the don't let him eat the weird things stuck to the couch. Don't let him eat the keyboard. Don't let him play with the phone chargers. Next thing you know, I'm gonna tell him not to try and bury the space heater even though it's a little stinky. Huh. Aren't I so rude to you? Please, fill us in. What's your opinion? Oh, well, thank you. Valuable input. Oh yeah, we gotta clean. We don't know where the phone's been, so now we gotta clean our face. Yeah, that's fair. Do 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 do. Sorry, I tried to get all this done in the BRB, but water getting took me a little longer than I meant it to. Oh, a chew! Bless you, sir. Did we just have one sneeze? Looks like we had just one sneeze, gang. Okay, now that I have dallied, tarried even, uh, I believe we have our cup of tea. We have a full water bottle. And now we can get back into the book. Ooh, you know what? While I'm dillying and dallying, I need... Oh, I've forgotten our ever vital co-host, Bean Pal, for a little bit of musculatory support. Hmm? Can't believe I would forget our boy Bean Pal. He's the most important member of the show. Oh, there goes library, munchin' crunchin'. Munch carefully, crunch carefully, sir. I don't want to deal with puke tonight. You already puked on the dash once this morning. That's plenty. Slow it down. Okay. Let us keep going here. Yeah, let's keep going. Oh. Ooh. Before I dive back in, you see that bug above my head? That is the Codex. It is a group of reading streamers, of whom Gariki is a proud member, myself as well. We are currently planning a very lovely little thing for a Christmas story in the Discord for Codex. We're, like I said, we're all read streamers. We all kind of have our own little genres so we don't cross over on each other. We all try not to stream at the same time as each other, but we're all streaming for so long because because we're reading books that it kind of we have a lot of we have some crossover, but we try not to stream each other's books. We have group projects, which I need to go sign up for the group project this weekend. I need to figure out when I can sign up for the group project and just sign up for it and see where it fits. But we'll see. I'll keep you all posted on that. Join my Discord as well, and I'll yell about it. I think we're ready to dive back in. Let's have a little drink of water, and then we will try to not accidentally page backwards anymore while we dive in to chapter 6, The Cat, Wag, Slim, and Others. I got out my precious casket. I sat by the window and watched. The moon shone out on the lid of the box, and it loosened in due course, and I touched my forehead with the ointment. But neither at once, nor for some little time after, did I notice any fresh power coming to me. With the moon, up also came the little town, and no sooner were the doors of the houses level with the grass than the boys were out of them, and running in some numbers toward my window. In fact, some slipped out of their own windows, not waiting for the doors to be available. Wag was the first. Slim, more sedate, came among the crowd that followed. These were still the only two who felt no hesitation about talking to me. The others were all fully occupied in exploring the room. "Tomorrow," I said, after some sort of how-do-you-dos had been exchanged, "you'll be flying all over the place, I suppose."
Yes,
said Wag shortly.
but I want to know. I say, Slim, what was it we wanted first? Wasn't there a message from your father? Said Slim. Oh, yes, of course. If they're about the house, he said, give them horseshoes. If there's a bat ball, the squirt at it. He thinks there's a squirt at the tool house. Oh, there's the cat. I must... After delivering all this in one sentence, he rushed to the edge of the table and took a kind of header into the midst of the unfortunate animal, who, however, only moaned or crowed without waking, and turned partly over on her back. Slim remained sitting on a book and gazed soberly at me. Well, it's very kind of Wag's father to send me a message, but I must say I can't make much of it." Slim nodded. "Yeah, so he said. And he said you'd see when the time came. Of course, I don't know myself. I've never seen a bat ball. Wag says he has, but you never know with Wag." Well, I must do the best I can, I suppose. But look here, Slim. I wish you could tell me one or two things. What are you? What do they call you?" "Well, they call me Slim. The whole of us they call the right people. But it's no good asking us much. We don't know. Besides, it isn't good for us." "Well, how do you mean?" "Well, you see, our job's to keep the little things right. If we do more than that, or we try to find out much more, then we burst." "That's the end of you?" "Oh, no, but that's one of the things it's no good asking." "And if you don't do your job, then what then?" "No, then they get smaller and have no sense." He said they and not we, I noticed. I see. Well, now, you go to school, don't you?" He nodded. "What for? Isn't that likely to be bad for you? I hardly like to say make you burst." "No. You see, it's to learn our job. We have to be told what used to go on, and so as we can put things right or keep them right. And the owls, you see, they remember a long way back, but they don't know any more than we do about the swell things." I was very shy about putting the next question I had in mind, but I felt I must. "Now, do you know how old you are, or how long it takes you to grow up, or how long you go on when you are grown up?" He pressed his hands to his head, and I was dreadfully afraid for the moment that it might be swelling and would burst, but it was not so bad as that. After a few seconds, he looked up and said, "I think it's 7 times 7 moons since I went to school, and 7 times 7 times 7 moons before I grow up, and the rest is no good asking, but it's all right." And this, I may say, was the most part of what I ventured to ask any of them about themselves, but at other times I gathered as long as they did their jobs, nothing could injure them, and they were regularly measured, all of them, to see if they were getting smaller, a careful record kept of such things. But if anyone lost as much as a quarter of his height, he was doomed, and he crept off out of the settlement. Whether such a one ever came back, I could not be sure. Most of the failures, and they weren't common, mind, went and lived in hollow trees or by brooks and were happy enough, but in a feeble way, not remembering much, or
make much of anything either. It was supposed to be that they very slowly shrunk down to the size of a pin's point and then probably to nothing. All the same, it was believed they could recover. Many other things that you would have asked, I did not, being anxious to avoid giving them trouble. But this time, anyhow, I felt I had catechized Slim long enough, so I broke off and said, "What can be Wag doing all this while?"
Oh, there's no knowing, but he's very quiet for him. Either he's doing something awful or he's asleep.
"Oh, I saw him with the cat last. You might go and look at her." He walked to the edge of the table and said,
Why, he is asleep.
and so he was, with his head on the cat's chest under her chin, which she'd turned up, and she had put her front paws together over the top of his head. As for the others, I described them sitting in a circle in the corner of the room, also very quiet. I imagine they were a little afraid of doing much without Wag, and also of waking him. But I could not make out what they were doing, and so I asked Slim.
Racing earwigs, I should think,
he said with something of contempt. Well, I hope they don't leave them about when they go. I don't like earwigs.
Well, who does? But they'll take them all away all right. They're prize ones, some of them.
Before he goes and looks over this race, I wanted to call out, that sounds so comfortable. Could you imagine just being, like, snuggled into a little cat? Like, right here? And, like, they're holding you in their little paws, and you're, like, snuggled into their chest fluff, and they're just purring. Oh, that sounds so wonderful. That sounds so comfortable. Incredibly cozy, even. Anyway, I went over and looked at the racing for a little. The course was neatly marked out, with small lights sprouting out of the boards, and the circle was at the winning post, the starters being at the other end, some 6 feet away. I watched one heat of it all. The earwigs seemed to me neither very speedy nor very intelligent, and all except for one were apt to stop in mid-course and engage in personal encounters with each other. I was beginning to wonder how long this would go on when Wag woke up. Like most of us, he was not willing to allow that he'd been asleep.
Oh, I thought I'd just lie down a bit, and then I didn't want to bustle your cat, so I stopped there. Now I want to know, Slim, what was it you were asking me? Me asking you? I don't know. Oh, yes, you do. What was he doing the other time before we came in? I didn't ask you that. You asked me. Well, it doesn't matter who asked.
And he turned to me.
What were you doing?
Oh, I don't know. Was it these things I was using? Holding up a pack of cards, or something like this. I held up a book.
Yes, that one. What were you doing with it? What's it for?
We call it reading a book. And I tried to explain what the idea was and read out a few lines. It happened to be Pickwick. They were absorbed. Slim, half to himself, said,
Something like a glass.
which I thought quite meaningless at the time. Then I showed them a picture in another book. That they made out very quickly.
And when's it going to move on?
Never. Ours stop just like that always. Do yours move on?
Of course they do. Look here.
He lay down on the tablecloth and pressed his forehead on it, but evidently could make nothing of it.
Oh, it's all rough.
I gave him a sheet of paper.
That's better.
And he lay down again in the same posture for a few seconds. Then he got up and began rubbing the paper all over with the palms of his hands. As he did so, a colored picture came out pretty quickly, and when it was finished, he drew aside to let me see and said, somewhat bashfully,
I don't think I've got it quite right, but I meant it for what happened the other evening.
He had certainly not got it right as far as I was concerned. It was a view of the window of the house, seen from outside by moonlight. There was a back view of a row of figures with their elbows on the sill. So far, so good. But inside the open window was standing a figure which was plainly, much too plainly, meant for me. Far too short and fat, far too red-faced, and with an owlish expression which I'm sure I never wear. This person was now seen to move his hand, a very poor hand with about 3 fingers, to his side and pull, apparently out of his body, a round object, more or less like a watch. Well, at least it was white on one side with black marks and yellow on the other, and lay it down in front of him. At this, the figures at the window-sill threw up their arms in all directions and fell or slid down like so many dolls. Then the picture began to get fainter and disappeared from the paper. Slim looked at me expectantly. Well, It's very interesting to see how you do it, but is that the best likeness of me you can make?
What's wrong with it? Isn't it handsome enough or something?
I heard Wag throw himself down on the table, and looking at him, I saw that he got both hands pressed over his mouth. May I ask what the joke is? I said, rather dryly, for it's surprising how touchy one can be over one's personal appearance, even at my time of life. He looked up for an instant at me, and then gasped and hid his face again. Slim went up to him and kicked him in the ribs.
Where are your manners?
He said in a loud whisper. Wag rolled over and sat up, wiping his eyes.
I'm very sorry. I'm sure I don't know what I was laughing for.
And Slim whistled.
Well, what was I? Oh, him, of course, and you know perfectly well. Oh, was I? Perhaps you'll tell me what there is to laugh about him,
said Wag rather basely, I thought. Slim put a finger to his lip and looked unhappy, so I interrupted them. Get up a minute, Wag. I want to see something.
What?
He jumped up at once. Stand back to back with Slim, if you don't mind. That's it. Dear me, I thought you were taller than that. You looked to me taller than last night. My mistake, I dare say. All right, thanks. But there they stood, gazing at each other with horror, and I felt I'd been trifling with a most serious subject, so I laughed and said, Don't disturb yourselves. I was only chaffing you, Wag. You seem to be doing something of the kind to me. Slim understood and heaved a sigh of relief, but Wag sat down on a book and looked reproachfully upon me. Neither of them said a word. I was very much ashamed and begged their pardon as nicely as I knew how. Luckily, Wag was soon convinced that I was not in earnest, and he recovered his spirits directly.
All right,
He said, nodding at me.
I hear you say you don't like earwigs. That's worth remembering, Slim.
This reduced me at once. I tried to point out that he'd begun it, and it'd be a mean revenge. Very hard on the earwigs if he filled my room with them. I'd be obliged to kill all of them I could.
And they needn't be real earwigs. My own tickled every bit as much as real ones.
This was no better for me. I tried to make more appeals to his better feelings. He didn't seem to be listening very attentively, though his eyes were fixed on me.
What's that on your neck?
He said, suddenly. At the same moment, I felt a procession of legs walking over my skin. I brushed at it hastily, and something seemed to fall on the table.
No, the other side, I mean.
And again I felt that same horrible tickling, and went through the same exercises, with a face, no doubt, contorted with terror. Anyhow, it seemed to amuse them very much. Wag was, in fact, quite unable to speak, and could only point. It was dumb of me not to have noticed that at once that these were his earwigs and not real ones. But now I did, and though I still felt the tickling, I did not move, but sat down and gazed severely at him. Soon he got the better of his mirth and said,
I think we're quits now.
Then with sudden alarm, he said,
Oh, I say, what's becoming of the others? The palace gone, has it?
How should I know? If you hadn't been making all this disturbance, might we have heard it? He took a flying leap, an extraordinary feat it was, from the edge of the table to a chair in the window, scrambled up to the sill, and gazed out.
It's all right,
he said in a voice of infinite relief, let himself down limply to the floor, and climbed slowly up my leg to his former place. Well, the bell hasn't gone, it seems, but where are the rest? I haven't hardly seen anything of them.
Oh, you go and find them, Slim. I'm worn out with all these frights.
Slim went to the farther end of the table, prospected, and returned. He reported them.
All right, but they're having a rather slow time of it, I think.
I too got up, walked around, and looked. They were seated in a solemn circle on the floor around the cat, who was now curled up and fast asleep on a round footstool. Not a word was being said by anybody. I thought I'd better address them, so I said, Gentlemen, I'm afraid I've been very inattentive to you this evening. Isn't there anything I can do to amuse you? Won't you come up on the table? You're welcome to walk up my leg if you find that convenient. I was almost sorry I'd spoken the moment after, for they made but one rush at my legs as I stood by the table, and the sensation was rather like that, I imagine, of a swarm of rats climbing up one's trousers. However, it was over in a few seconds, and all of them, over a dozen, were with Wag and Slim on the table, except one who, whether by mistake or on purpose, went on climbing me by the way of my waistcoat buttons, rather deliberately, till he reached my shoulder. I didn't object, of course, but I turned round, which made him catch at my ear, and went back to my chair, seated in which I felt rather as if I was presiding at a meeting. The one on my shoulder sat down, and, I thought, folded his arms, looked at his friends with some triumph. Wag evidently took this to be a liberty.
My word, he said. What do you mean by a whiz? Come off it.
Wisp was a little daunted, as I judged by his fidgeting somewhat, but he put on a bold face and said,
Why should I come up?
I put in a word. I don't mind his being here,
I dare say not. That's not the point.
said Wag.
You coming down?
No, said Wisp,
Not for you.
but his tone was rather blustering than brave.
Very well, down then.
Said Wag, and I expected him to run up and pull Wisp down by the legs, but he didn't do that. He pulled something out of the chest of his tunic, put it in his mouth, lay down on his stomach, and with his eyes on Wisp, puffed out his cheeks. 2 or 3 seconds passed, during which I felt Wisp shifting about on his perch and breathing quickly. Then he gave a sharp shriek,
Whoa!
which went right through my head. It slipped rapidly down my chest and legs and onto the floor, where he continued to squeal and run about like a mad thing, to the great amusement of everyone on the table. Then I saw what was the matter. All round his head were a multitude of little sparks, which flew about him like a swarm of bees, every now and then settling and coming off again, and I suppose burning him every time. If he beat them off, they attacked his hands, so he was in it for a bad way. After watching him for about a minute from the edge of the table, Wag called out,
You apologize?
"Yes!" he screamed.
Alright, stand still, you bat. How can I get him back if you don't?
Wag was back to me, and I couldn't see what he said, or did for that matter, but Wisp sat down on the carpet, free of sparks, and wiped his face and neck with his handkerchief for some time, while the rest gradually recovered from their laughter.
You can come up again now.
Said Wag, and so he did, though he was slow and shy about it. Why didn't he send sparks at Wag? Said I to Slim.
He hasn't got him to send. It's only the captain of the moon.
Well now, what about a little peace and quiet? You know, I've never been introduced to you all properly. Wouldn't it be a good idea to do that before the bell goes?
Very well, we'll do it properly. You bring him up one at a time, Slim, and you put your sun hand on the table.
Sun hand.
Yes, sun hand, don't you know?
He held up his right hand, then his left.
Sun hand, moon hand, day hand, night hand, star hand, cloud hand, so on.
Thank you. This was done, and meanwhile Slim formed the troop into a queue and beckoned them up one by one. Wag stood on a book on the right and proclaimed the name of each. First he had made me arrange my right hand edgeways on the table with the forefinger out. Then,
Gold, says
Wag. Gold stepped forward and made a lovely bow, which I returned with an inclination of my head, then took as much of my forefinger top joint in his right hand as he could manage, bent over it and shook it, or at least tried to, then took up a position on the left and waited for the next comer. The ceremony was the same for everyone, but not all the bows were equally elegant. Some of the boys were jocular and shook my finger with both hands in a great display of effort. These were frowned upon by Wag. The names, I need not set them all down now, were all of the same kind as you've heard. There was Red, Wise, Dart, Sprat, and so on. After Wisp, who came last and was rather humble, Wag called out Slim, and after him descended and presented himself in the same form.
And now, perhaps he'll tell us your name.
I did so. One is always a little shamefaced about it, I don't know why, in full. And he whistled.
Too much. What's the easiest you can do?
After some thought, I said, what about M or N?
There's so much better. If M's all right for you, it'll do for us.
And so M was agreed upon. I was still rather afraid that the rank and file had been passing a dull evening and would not come again, and I tried to express as much to them, but they said,
No, Em, we've found out all sorts of things.
Really? What sorts of things?
Well, inside the wall in that corner, there's the biggest spider I've ever seen, for one thing.
Good gracious, I hate 'em. I hope it can't get out.
You would have tonight if we hadn't stopped up the hole. Something's been helping it to gnaw through. Has it? Said Wag. My word, that looks bad. What was it that made the hole?
Someone called out a bat, and some a rat.
It shouldn't matter much for that, said Slim. So long as it's safe now. Where is it? Gone down to the bottom saying awful things, said Red.
Well, I am obliged to you. Anything else?
There's a lot of this stuff under the floor,
said Dart, pointing with his foot at a half-crown which lay on the table. Is there? Whereabouts? Oh, but I was forgetting. I can look after that myself.
Yeah, of course you can. Lots of things happened here before you came. We were watching. This old man and the woman, they were the worst, weren't they, Red?
You mean you've been here before?
No, but tonight we were looking at them like we do at school.
This was beyond me, and I thought it would be of no use to ask for more explanations. Besides, just at this moment, we heard the bell. They all clambered down, either me or the chairs or the tablecloth. Slim lingered a moment to say,
You look out, won't you?
and then followed the rest onto the windowsill, where, taking the time from Captain Wag, they all stood in a row, bowed with their caps off, straightened up again. Each sang one note, which combined into a wonderful chord, faced round, and disappeared. I followed them to the window, and saw the inhabitants of the house separating and going to their homes, with the young ones capering round them. One or two of the elders, Wag's father in particular, looked up at me, paused in their walk, and bowed gravely, which courtesy I returned. I went on gazing until the lawn was blank once more, and then, closing and fastening the sitting-room window, betook myself to the bedroom. This was definitely worth waiting for, this tea. Oh. I am not often one to kind of, sit and absorb the heat from a warm drink. But I think it's that kind of night, a little bit. Oh. I do hope all of my little crinkle crunches are not coming across on the video. Where can I set this? I had set it here, but I think the keyboard won't allow that. It's kind of tilting a little bit. It's a little bit out of shot, so you can't see, but it's tilting a little bit. Maybe if I move this so it's sitting on my lap. Drop my mouse. That'll do. Let's dive into chapter 5, 6, 7, the Bat Ball. It had certainly been an eventful day and evening, and I felt that my adventures would not be quite at an end, for I still had to find out what new power or sense the fourth jar had brought me. I stood and thought, and tried quite vainly to detect some difference in myself. Then I went to the window and drew the curtain aside and looked out on the road, and within a few minutes I began to understand properly. There came walking rapidly along the road a young man, and he turned in at the garden gate and came straight up the path to the house door. I began to be surprised, not at his coming, for it wasn't so very late, but at the look of him. He was young, as I said, rather red-faced, but not bad-looking, of the class of a farmer, I thought. He wore biggish brown whiskers, which is not common nowadays, and his hair was rather long at the back, which also isn't common with the young men who want to look smart, but his hat and his clothes generally were the really odd part of it. His hat was a sort of low top hat with a curved brim. It spread out at the top and was brushed rough instead of smooth. His coat was a blue swallowtail with brass buttons. He had a broad tie wound round and round his neck and a Gladstone collar. His trousers were tied all the way down and had straps under his feet. To put it in the dullest, shortest way, he was dressed in the fashion of 80 or 90 years ago, as we read in the ghost stories. Evidently, he knew his way around quite well. He came straight up to the house, and the front door of it even, and as far as I could tell, into the house, but I didn't hear the door open or shut or any steps on the stairs. He must, I thought, be in my landlady's parlor downstairs. I turned away from the window, and there was the next surprise. It was as if there was no wall between me and the sitting room. I saw straight into it. There was a fire in the grate, and by it were sitting face to face an old man and an old woman. I thought of at once what one of the boys had said, and looked curiously at them. They were, as you would have said, fine specimens as an old-fashioned yeoman and his wife, as anyone would wish to see. The man was hale and red-faced, with grey whiskers, smiling as he sat bolt upright in his armchair. The old lady was rosy and smiling too, with a smart silk dress and a smart cap, and tidy ringlets on either side of her face, a regular picture of wholesome old age. And yet I hated them both. The young man, their son, I suppose, was in the room standing at the door with his hat in his hand, looking timidly at them. The old man turned half round in his chair, looked at him, turned down the corners of his mouth, looked across at the old lady, and they both smiled as if they were both amused. The son came farther into the room, put his hat down, leaned with both hands on the table, and began to speak, though nothing could be heard, with an earnestness that was painful to see, because sometimes I could be certain that his pleading would be of no use. Sometimes he spread out his hands and shook them. Every now and again he brushed his eyes. He was very much moved, and so was I, merely watching him. The old people were not. They leaned forward a little in their chairs, and sometimes smiled at each other, again as if they were amused. At last he'd done, and stood with his hands before him, quivering all over. His father and mother leaned back in their chairs and looked at each other. I think they said not a single word. The son caught up his hat, turned round, and went quickly out the room. Then the old man threw back his head and laughed, and the old lady laughed too, not quite as boisterously. I turned back to the window. It was as I expected. Outside the garden gate in the road, a young slight girl in a large poke bonnet and shawl and rather short-skirted dress was waiting, in great anxiety, as I could see by the way she held to the railings. Her face I could not see. The young man came out. She clasped her hands, he shook his head, and they went off together, slowly, up the road, he with bowed shoulders supporting her, she, I dare say, crying. Again I looked round to the sitting-room, and the wall hid it now. It sounds a dull, ordinary scene enough, but I can assure you it was horribly disturbing to watch, and the cruel, calm way in which the mother and father, who looked so nice and worthy, and yet were so abominable, treated their son, it was like nothing I had ever seen. Of course, I knew now the effect of the fourth jar. It made me able to see what was happening, or what had happened, in any place. I did not know yet how far back the memories would go, or whether I was obliged to see them if I did not want to, but it was clear to me that the boys were sometimes taught in this way. We were watching them like we do at school, one of them had said, and though the grammar was poor, the meaning was plain, and I would ask Slim about it when we next met. Meanwhile, I must say I hoped the gift would not go on working instead of letting me go to sleep, and thankfully it did not. Next day I met my landlady employing herself in the garden, and asked her about the people who formerly lived in the house.
Oh, yes. I can tell you about them, for my father, he remembered old Mr. and Mrs. Eld quite well when he was a slip of a lad. They wasn't like to the place, neither of them, partly, though, being so hard-like to their work people, and partly from them treating their only son so bad. I mean to say, turning him right off because he married without asking permission. Well, no doubt that's what he shouldn't have done, but my father said it was a very nice, respectable young girl he married. It just seemed hard for them to never say a word of kindness all those long years. You leave every penny away from the young people. What become of them, you say? Well, I believe they migrated away to the United States of America. They never were heard of again, but the old people, they lived on here, and I never heard but what they was easy in their minds right up to the day of their death. Nice-looking old people they were, too, my father used to say. Seemed as if butter wouldn't melt in their mouths, the saying goes. Now, I don't know when I've thought of them last, but I recollect my father speaking of them as well, the way they spoke of on their stone that lays just to the right-hand side you go up the churchyard path. Well, you'd never think there was any such people. But I believe that was put up by them that got the property. What was their name again?
About that time I thought I must be getting on. I also thought, as before, that it'd be well for me to not go very far away from the house. As I strolled up the road, I pondered over the message which Wag's father had been good to send me. If they're about the house, give them horseshoes. There's a bat ball, squirt at it. I think there's a squirt in the tool house. All very well, no doubt. I had one horseshoe. That wasn't much. I could explore the tool house and borrow the garden squirt, but more horseshoes? At that moment, I heard a squeak and rustle in the hedge, and could not help but poking my stick into it to see what had made the noise. The stick clicked against something with its iron ferrule. An old horseshoe, evidently shown to me on purpose by a friendly creature. I picked it up, and not to make a long story of it, was helped by much the same devices to increase my collection to 4. and now I felt it to be wise to turn back. As I turned into the back garden and came in sight of the little potting shed or tool house or whatever it was, I started. Something was just coming out of it. I gave a loud cough, and so the party turned round hastily. It was an old man in a sleeved waistcoat, made up, I thought, to look like an odd man. He touched his hat civilly enough and showed no surprise, but, oh, horror, he held in his hand the garden squirt. Morning. Going to do a bit of watering. And he grinned at me.
Oh, just stepped up to borrow this off the lady. There's a lot of fly gets on the plants this weather.
I dare say there is. By the way, what a lot of horseshoes you people leave about. Oh, how many do you think I picked up this morning just along the road? Look here. And I held one out to him. His hand came out slowly to meet it, as though he could not keep it back. His face wrinkled up into a horrible scowl, and what he was going to say, I don't know. Just then his hand clutched the horseshoe, and he gave a shout of pain, dropped the squirt and the horseshoe, whipped round as quick as any young man could, and was off round the corner of the shed before I'd really taken in what had happened. Before I tried to see what would become of him, I snatched up the squirt and the horseshoe and almost dropped them again. Both of them were pretty hot, the squirt the much hotter of the two, but both of them did cool down in a few seconds. By that time, my old man was completely out of sight. I shouldn't wonder if he was away some time, for perhaps you know, and perhaps you don't know, the effect of an old horseshoe on that sort of people. Not only is it of iron, which they can't abide, but when they still see or more touch the shoe, they have to go all over the ground that the shoe went over, since it was last in the blacksmith's hands. Only I doubt if the same shoe will work for more than one witch or wizard. Anyway, I put that aside when I went indoors, and I sat and wondered which could come next, and how I could best prepare for it. It occurred to me that it would do no harm to put one of the shoes where it couldn't be seen at once, and it also struck me that under the rug just inside the bedroom door would not be a bad place. So there I put it, and I fell to smoking and reading. A knock came at my door. Come in, said I, a little curious, but no, it was only the maid. As she passed me, which she did quickly, I heard her mutter something about handkerchiefs for the wash, and I thought there was something quite not usual about the voice. So I looked round. She had her back to me, but the dress and the height and the hair was what I was accustomed to see. Into the bedroom she hurried, and the next thing was a scream like that of at least two cats in agony. I could see her leap on into the air, come down again on the rug, and scream again, and then bundle, hopping, limping, I don't know what, out of the room and down the stairs. I did catch sight of her feet, though. They were bare, they were greenish, and they were webbed. I think there were some large white blisters on the soles of them. You would have thought that the commotion would have brought the household about my ears, but it didn't, and I only suppose they heard no more of it than they did of the things which the birds and so on say to each other. Next, please, said I as I lighted a pipe, but if you'll believe it, there was no next. Lunch, the afternoon tea, they all passed by, and I was completely undisturbed. Oh, they must be saving up for the bat ball, I thought. What in the world can it be? As candle time came on, and the moon began to make herself felt, I took up my old position at the window, with the garden squirt at hand, and 2 full jugs of water on the floor, plenty more to be got from the bathroom, if wanted. The leaden box of the 5 jars was in the right place for the moonbeams to fall on it, but no moonbeams would touch it tonight. Why was this? There were no clouds, yet between the orb of the moon and my box there was some obstruction. High up in the sky was a dancing film, thick enough to cast a shadow on the area of the window, and ever as the moon rode higher in the heavens, this obstruction became more solid. It seemed gradually to get its bearings and settle into the place where it would shut out the light from the box most completely. I began to guess it must be the bat ball, neither more nor less than a dense cloud of bats, gradually forming itself into a solid ball, coming lower and nearer to my window. Soon enough, they were only 30 feet off, and I felt the moment had come. I'd never much liked bats, or desired their company, for that matter, and now, as I studied them through the glass, and saw their horrid little wicked faces and winking wings, I felt justified in trying to make things as unpleasant for them as I could. I charged the squirt and let fly, and again, as quick as I could fill it. The water spread a bit before it reached the ball, but not too much to spoil the effect, and that effect was almost alarming. Some hundreds of bats, all shrieking out at once, shrieking with rage and fear, not generally from the excitement of chasing flies as they do. Dozens of them dropping away, wings too soaked to fly, some of them on the grass where they hopped and fluttered and rolled in ecstasies of passion, some into bushes, one or two plumb onto the path, where they lay motionless. That was the first to blow. Then came a new feature. From both sides there darted into the heart of the ball 2 squadrons of figures flying at great speed, though without wings, and perfectly horizontal, with arms joined and straight out in front of them, and almost at the same instant 7 or 8 more plunged into the ball from above as if taking headers. The boys were out. I stopped squirting, for I did not know whether the water would fell them as it fell the bats, but a shrill cry rose from below.
Go on, Em, go on!
And so I aimed again, and it was time, for a knot of bats just then detached itself from the main body and flew full face toward me. My shot caught the middle one in the snout, and as I swung the squirt from left to right, it disabled 4 or 5 others and discouraged the rest. Meanwhile, the ball was cloven again and again by the arms of the flying squadrons, which shot through it from side to side and top to bottom, though never, as it appeared later, quite through the middle. And though it kept closing up again, it was plainly growing smaller as more and more of the bats outside, which were exposed to the squirt, dropped away. I suddenly felt something alight on my shoulder, and a voice said in my ear,
Wag says if you could throw a shoe into the middle now, he believes it'd finish them. Could you?
It was, I think, Dart who had been sent with the message. Horseshoes, I suppose he means. I'll try.
Wait till we're out of the way.
And he said Dart, and he was off. In a moment more I heard, not what I was rather expecting, a horn of Elfland, but 2 strokes on the bell. I saw the figures of the boys shoot up and away to the left and the right, leaving the bat ball clear, and the bats shrieked aloud, I dare say in triumph at the enemy's retreat. There were 2 horseshoes left. I had no idea how they would fly, and I had not much confidence in my power of aiming, but it must be tried, and I threw them edgeways like quoits. The first skimmed the top of the ball, and the second went straight through the middle. Something which the bats in the very center were holding, something soft, was pierced by it and burst. I think it must have been a globe of jelly-like stuff in a thin skin. The contents spurted out onto some of the bats, and seemed to scald the fur off them in an instant, and singe up all the membranes of their wings. They fell down at once with broken screams, the rest darted off in every direction, and the ball was gone.
Now don't be long,
said a voice from the windowsill. I thought I knew what was meant, and looked to the leaden casket. As if to make up for lost time, the moonbeam had already made an opening all round the part on which it shone, and I had but to turn the other side toward it, not even very slowly, to get the whole lid free. After cleansing my hands in the water, I made trial of the 5th jar, and as I replaced it, a chorus of applause and cheering came up from below. The jars were mine. Excuse me while I'm drinking some water. Make sure nothing's immediately on fire. Not this time. Actually, we're about 75% of the way through this book. Depending on how I'm feeling, we might actually be able to finish this one. Although it may turn into, oops, I spent time with the wrong book. And we might have to come back next week. We'll see, actually. Table of contents. There are 9. Oh, we're on the last chapter of the book. Alright, yeah, we can finish this up then. Let's dive into the last chapter, Wag at Home. There was no scrambling up to the windowsill this time. My visitors shot in like so many arrows, and brought up their hands on the tablecloth, or lit on their feet at the top rail of a chair back, or on my shoulder as the fancy took them. It would be tedious to go through all the congratulations and thanks which I offered, and indeed received, for it was more important to them that the jars should not get into the wrong hands.
Father says,
said Wag, who was sitting on a book as usual.
Oh, what fun it is to be able to fly again.
And he darted straight and level and butted head first on the back of Sprat, was it? Who was standing near the edge of the table. Sprat was merely propelled into the air a foot or two off, and remained standing, but, of course, turned round and told Wag what he thought of him. Wag returned contentedly to his book.
Father says he hopes you'll come and see us now. He says you did all right. He's very glad the stuff got spilt, because they'll take moons and moons to get as much of it together again. He says they meant to squirt some of it on you when they got near enough. While you were trying to get it off of you, they'd have got a hold of.
And he pointed to the box of jars. There was a shyness about mentioning it. Your father's very kind. I hope you'll thank him from me, but I don't quite see how I'm to get into your house.
Fancy you not knowing that. I'll tell him you'll come.
And he was out of the window. And as usual, I had to recourse to Slim.
Well, you did put some on your chest, did you?
Was Slim's question. Yes, but nothing came of it.
Well, I believe you can go pretty well anywhere with that if you think you can.
Can I fly then?
No, I should say not. I mean, if you couldn't fly before, you can't now.
How do you fly? I don't see any wings.
No, we never have wings. I'm rather glad we don't. Things that have them are always going wrong somehow. We just work it in the proper way with our backs, and there you are, like this.
He made a slight movement of his shoulders and was standing in the air an inch off the table.
You never tried that, I suppose?
No, only in dreams, which evidently meant nothing to him. Well, now, do you tell me that if I went to Wag's house now, I could get inside of it? Look at the size I am.
It doesn't look as if you could, but my father said just the same as Wag's father about it.
And here Wag shot onto my shoulder.
Are you coming?
Yes, if I knew how.
Well, come and try anyhow.
Very well, as you please. Anything to oblige. I picked up a hat and went downstairs. All the rest followed, if you can call it following, when there was at least as much flying up steps and in and out of banisters as going down. When we were out on the path, Wag said with more seriousness than usual.
Now, do you mean to come into our house, don't you?
Certainly I do, if you wish me to.
Then that's all right. This way. There's father.
We were on the grass now, and very long it was, and nice and wet I thought I should be with all the dew. As I looked up to see the elder Wag, I very nearly fell over a large log, which was very careless of anyone to have left about. But here was Mr. Wag within a yard of me. To my extreme surprise, he was quite a sizable man of middling height, with a sensible, good-humored face, in which I could see a strong likeness to his son. We both bowed and then shook hands, and Mr. Wag was very complimentary and pleasant about the occurrences of the evening.
Well, we've pretty well got the mess cleared up, you see. Yes, don't be alarmed.
He went on, and took hold of my elbow, for he had, no doubt, seen a bewildered look in my eyes. The fact was, I suppose you've made out, not that he'd grown to my size, but I'd come down to his.
Oh, things right themselves. You'll have no difficulty getting back when the time comes, but do come in, won't you?
You'll expect me to describe the house and the furniture. I shall not, further than to say that it seemed to me to be of a piece with the fashion in which the boys were dressed. That is, it was like my idea of a good citizen's house in Queen Elizabeth's time, and I shall not describe Mrs. Wag's costume. She didn't wear a ruff, anyhow. Wag, who had been darting about in the air when we walked to his home, followed us in on foot. He now reached up to my shoulder, and Slim, who came in too, was shorter. Haven't you got any sisters? I took occasion to say to Wag.
Of course, don't you see him? Oh, I forgot. Come out, you sillies.
Upon which there came forward 3 nice little girls, each of whom was putting away something into a kind of locket which she wore round her neck. No, it's no use asking me what their dresses were like. None at all. All I know is that they curtsied to me very nicely, and when we all sat down, the youngest came and put herself on my knee as if it was a matter of course. Why didn't I see you before?
I suppose because the flowers were in her hair?
Show him what you mean, my dear. He doesn't know our ways yet.
Accordingly, she opened her locket and took out of it a small blue flower, looking as if it was made of enamel, and stuck it in her hair over her forehead. As she did so, she vanished, but I could still feel the weight of her on my knee. When she took it out again, as no doubt she did, she became visible, put it back in the locket, and smiled agreeably at me. Naturally, I had a good many questions to ask about this, but you'll hardly expect me to put them all down. Becoming invisible in this way was a privilege which I suppose the girls always had, till they were grown up at least. I suppose it, I may say, came out. Oh, that's the original meaning of the phrase came out into polite society rather than the sense that like it evolved into. I don't think I've ever seen somebody like, which is funny that I've never seen it given the type of books I read here, that I've never seen someone, coming of age being described as coming out. That's fascinating. Uh Stick a pin in that. I'll explain further once we're done with the book, because that's actually a really neat train of history if you don't know it. Of course, if they presumed on it, the lockets were taken away for the time being, just in the same way that the boys were sometimes stopped from flying, as we've seen. But their own families could always see them, or at any rate, the flowers in their hair, and they could always see each other. But dear me, how am I to tell of the conversation that evening? One part at least. I remember to ask about the pictures of the things that had happened in former times and places where I chanced to be. Was I obliged to see them, whether they were pleasant or horrible? Oh no, they had said. If you shut your eyes from below, that meant pushing up your lower eyelids, you'd be rid of them. You only begin seeing them either if you wanted to, or if you left your mind quite blank and were thinking of nothing in particular. Then they would begin to come, and there would be no knowing how old they might be, depended on how angry or excited or happy or sad the people had been to whom they happened. That reminds me of another thing. Wag had got rather fidgety while we were talking, and was flying up to the ceiling and down again, walking on his hands and so forth, when his mother said, "Dear, do be quiet. Why don't you take a glass and amuse yourself with it? Here's the key of the cupboard." She threw it to him, and he caught it, and ran to a tall bureau opposite and unlocked it. After humming and flitting about in front of it for a little while, he pulled a small thing like a slate off a shelf where there were a large number of them. "What have you got?" said his mother. "The one I didn't get to the end of yesterday about the dragon." "Oh, that's a very good one. I used to be very fond of that." I liked it awfully as far as I got," he said, and he was betaking himself to settle on the other side of the room when I asked if I might see it, and he brought it to me. It was just like a small looking glass in a frame, and the frame had one or two buttons or little knobs on it. Wag put it into my hand and then got behind me and put his chin on my shoulder. "That's where I'd got to. He's just going out through the forest." I thought at the first glance that I was looking at a very good copy of a picture. It was a knight on horseback in plate armor, and the armor looked as if it had really seen service. The horse was a massive white beast, rather the cart horse type, but not so hairy in the hoof. The background was a wood, chiefly of oak trees, but the undergrowth was wonderfully painted. I felt that if I looked into it I should see every blade of grass and every bramble leaf. Harry and the Hoof, that brings up another thought, another fun fact that I can just drop in right now. Apparently, the genes to get a horse larger and larger tend to co-express with the same genes that kind of give them the big fluffy leg hair. You know, like you picture a stereotypical Clydesdale, and they have the big like shock of white hair around their hooves. That gene is codependent on making the horse larger. So, like, as you are breeding a horse larger and larger and larger, it is more and more likely to get essentially extra hair or fur on its legs. They're kind of like they're codependent. They're bound traits essentially. Which that's interesting that that's been known about for a long time. At least that's what that phrase suggests to me. Anyway. "Ready?" said Wag, and reached over and moved one of the knobs. The knight shook his reins, and the horse began to move at a foot pace. "Well, I can't hear anything, Wag," said his father. "I thought you wanted to be quiet, but we'll have it aloud if you like." He slid aside another knob, and I began to hear the tread of the horse, and the creaking of the saddle, and the clink of the armor, as well as a rising breeze which now came sighing through the wood. Like a cinema, you'll say, of course. It was, but there was color and sound, and you could hold it in your hand. It wasn't a photograph, but the live thing which you could stop at pleasure and look into every detail of it. So like a modern cinema. Or I guess you could look into every detail of it. It'd be kind of like a interactive, web experience where you can zoom in further. I don't know. Well, I went on reading, as you might say, this glass. In a theater, if you saw a knight riding through the forest, the effect would be managed by making the scenery slide backwards past him. and in a cinema it could all be shortened up by increasing the pace or leaving out part of the film. Here it was not like that. We seemed to be keeping pace and going along with the night. Presently he began to sing. He had a loud voice and uttered his words crisply, so that I had no difficulty in making out the song. It was about a lady who was very proud and haughty to him, and would have nothing to say to his suit, and it declared that the only thing left for him was to lay himself down under a tree. But he seemed quite cheerful about it. Indeed, neither his complexion nor the glance of his eye gave any signs that he was suffering the pangs of a hopeless love. Suddenly his horse stopped short and snorted uneasily. The knight left off singing in the middle of a verse, looked earnestly into the wood at the back of the picture, and then out towards us, then behind him. He patted his horse's neck, and then, humming to himself, put on his gauntlets, which were hanging at the saddle bow, somehow managed to latch or bolt the fastening of them, slipped down its visor, and took the hilt of his sword in one hand, and the sheath in the other, and loosed the blade out of the sheath. He had hardly done this when the horse shied violently and reared, and out of the thicket on the near side of the road, I suppose, something shot up in front of him on the saddle, so we all drew in our breath.
Don't be frightened, dear,
Said Miss Wagg to the youngest girl who'd given a sort of jump.
It's quite safe this time.
I must say it didn't look like it. The beast that had leapt onto the saddle was tearing with its claws, drawing back its head and driving it forward again with horrid force against the visor, and was at such close quarters the knight could not possibly either draw or use his sword. It was a horrible beast, too, evidently a young dragon. As it sat on the saddle bow, its head was just about level with the knight's. It had 4 short legs with long toes and claws. It clung to the saddle with its hind feet and tore with its forefeet, as I said. Its head was rather long. One moment. Excuse me, sir. Are you aware that burying only works in the litter box, sir? Oh, I missed him. I was gonna try and give you all some more doubloons. Anyway, where was I? Its head was rather long and had 2 pointed ears and 2 small, sharp horns. Besides that, it had bat wings with which it buffeted the knight, but its tail was short. I don't know whether it had been bitten or cut off in some previous fight. It was all of a mustard yellow color. The knight was for the moment having a bad time of it, for the horse was plunging and the dragon doing its very worst. The crisis was not long, though. The knight took hold of the right wing with both hands and tore the membrane upwards to the root like a parchment. It bled yellow blood, and the dragon gave a grating scream. Then he clutched it hard by the neck and managed to wrench it away from its hold on the saddle. And when it was in the air, he whirled its body, heavy as it was, first over his back and then forwards again, and its neck bone, I suppose, broke, for it was quite limp when he cast it down. He looked down at it for a little bit, and seeing it stir, he got off the horse with the rein over his arm, drew his sword, and cut the head off of it, kicking it away some yards. The next thing he did was to push up his visor, look upward, mutter something I couldn't well hear, and cross himself, after which he said aloud, "Where man finds one of a brood, he may look for more," mounted, turned his horse's head, and galloped off the way he'd come. Sir, are you where you don't need to do that? Well, I'll let him be up there. He's usually pretty good about things up there. I was gonna try and grab a him and show a him beans for him being naughty boy. You know, as one does. Hi, Raz. Ooh, Jesse isn't here yet, so I figured I'd drop in for a few. Fair! You were spending time with Jesse tonight. I forgot about that. Tell him hello from me. We'd not followed him far through the wood when...
Father, there's the bell.
And Wag reached over and slid back the knobs in the frame, and the knight stopped. I was full of questions, but there was no time to put them. Good nights had to be said quickly, and Father Wag saw me out the front door. What I don't see is the book I'm reading, because someone's in the way. You'll never guess who's in the way. His name starts with M, ends with Agnes. Sir, I need to be able to see the screen. Thank you. Thank you for sitting down. That was very nice of you. Anyway, the front door. That's where I was. I set out on what seemed a considerable walk across the rough grass towards the open building. I sat out on what seemed a considerable walk across the rough grass toward the enormous building in which I lived. I suppose I did not really take many minutes about getting to the path, and as I stepped onto it, rather carefully, it was the longish way down. Why, without any shock or any odd feeling, was my own size again, and I went to bed pondering much upon the events of that day. Well, I began this communication by saying that I was going to explain to you how it was that I heard something from the owls, and I think I've explained how it is that I'm able to say that I've done so. Exactly what it was that you and I were talking about when I mentioned the owls, I dare say neither of us remembers. As you can see, I've had more exciting experiences than merely conversing with them. Interesting, and I think unusual as that is. I have not, of course, told you nearly all there is to tell, but perhaps I've said all I can for the present. More, if you should wish it, another time. Sir? Sir, I have a very simple question for you. Why do you feel entitled to get into the computer cabinet? Sir? Sir, are you aware you do not have permission to be in the computer cabinet? Are you aware there is sensitive equipment in there? Sir, please stop avoiding the question, sir. That's what I thought. Excuse the press questions. Also, that's kind of fitting the way I started this then, because he's like, oh yes, I'm out of time, I'm telling you the story, and I don't remember what we were talking about. Perhaps he was doing a dramatic reading of a history, you know? Anyway, as to present conditions, today there's a slight coolness between Wisp and the cat. He made his way into a mouse hole which she was watching, and enticed her close up to it by making scratchings and other sounds. Then when she came quite near, taking great trouble, of course, to make no noise whatsoever, he put his head out and blew in her face, which affronted her very much. However, I believe I have persuaded her that he meant no harm. The room is rather full of them tonight. Wag and most of the rest are rehearsing a play which they mean to present before I go. Slim, who happens not to be wanted for a time, is maneuvering on a table, facing me, and is trying to produce a portrait of me which shall be a little less libelous than his first effort. He's just shown me the final production, with which he's greatly pleased, but I am not. Farewell. I am, with the usual expression of regard, yours, M. Or N. That was The 5 Jars by Montague Rhodes James. I was not expecting to finish that tonight. I was expecting that to be a 2-episode thing. The thing that I told you I was going to tell you about at the end of the book, coming out. So, the use of the phrase earlier in the book there, coming out, was in description as coming out into polite society. Essentially, you come of age. I think this was mostly young women at the time, but it might have been also young men. Essentially, you reach a certain age in this. Oh, there he is. Yeah, it's Magnus. You reach a certain age, and you are then invited to have a coming out into polite society. You live your life for a while as a child, separate from the polite dinner parties and the debutante balls and everything. But then you have this coming out ball, where you kind of essentially introduce yourself as a concept to the to polite society at large, and that's actually where the term coming out as not straight comes from. Essentially, this tradition of coming out and revealing oneself as someone to polite society was picked up by queer people. I say that as a very large blanket term because the words have shifted 1,000 times over the last however many years. Essentially, it came from that same sense of introducing yourself, like, oh, I am not who I thought. You had this impression of me, but that's not the correct impression. Here I am. And there was actually a very grand tradition of having, like, literally lavish coming out parties, in the same tradition as these large, lavish coming out balls, uh, that were held, because these were, one of many social events. The original coming out balls, I mean, were one of these, particular social events that were used as a way to display the wealth and affluence of one's family, and so having a very large and dramatic coming out, uh, was seen as something very desirable. And in that same tradition of the coming out balls, there were these coming out parties where it's like, you know, let's say a young gay man is kind of like figuring out, oh man, and once he kind of gets it in his head and he figures it out, you know, there were sometimes these coming out parties, you know, held at whatever space it was. You know, maybe it was a club, maybe it was a bar, maybe it was, you know, something along that line. But there were these coming out parties in that same tradition, and they were much beloved, I would say, according to historical record anyway. And there was a lot of there's a lot of weight to that. And honestly, it's not a bad idea. I kind of wish it had stuck around. That'd be kind of nice, instead of just kind of dropping it on somebody, you know, dropping it on like your family at like a function or something, because that's when everybody's there and you want everybody to know. You just throw a party and be like, "Hi, I have, you know, this is a party and I want everybody to come over, you know." So you don't have to, like, you know, you don't have to quote unquote ruin another function to come out. You can just throw a function and be like, "This is my coming out party. Surprise! I'm not straight." I would love to see that make a comeback, you know. Uh, and it's funny. I've seen people suggest it making a comeback in kind of counterplay to the gender reveal parties. But anyway, that's my little historical tidbit on things that I only sort of know about. There's a lot more detail there, definitely. If you're interested in the things I was just talking about, I believe in high society, young women had chaperones, often a woman of higher status in high society, to show the younger woman or girl how high society works, if you recall correctly. That sounds correct. That sounds like a thing that I've heard mentioned in passing in a few things. Kind of in that same sense of leading up to their coming out. Raz is right on the money. That sounds right. If this sounds interesting to you, definitely dig on it. It's a really fascinating, like, deep well of tradition, and like how it kind of it is inextricably tied to the phrase coming out as gay now. You know, coming out as bi, coming out as a lesbian, coming out as trans. It's very interesting to draw that line from like Victorian high society to, oh, we don't do this anymore, but what if we did? You know, I like it a lot. I think it's fascinating. Anyway, this book was really good. I was like, I knew it was gonna be some fairy type thing, and I was like, oh, this will be interesting. This will be neat. And like, as it's going along, I'm like, no, don't give them your name. No, don't take any gifts. No. But it didn't go that way. I'm so used to like it being a horribly, horribly bad idea to give them your name or a word, or you know, they say, oh, can I have a word, and then you can't perceive that word anymore. Oh, can I have your name? And then you cannot be referred to anymore, or like that sort of thing, or like, oh, you've taken a gift and now you're under our control. You know, I was like, no, it's gonna go bad, and then it didn't go bad. That was really fun. I liked that a lot. That was a really fun little story. Uh, as for the book we started, I'll come back to that one. Like I said, I need to do a lot more supporting research on that one. I want to present that in a context that is understandable to someone who normally doesn't know what's going on. I don't want to just be reading this and just like I felt that I could really tell. I was like, I don't know what's going on. What are some of these words? What is the context this was written in? And so I'll find some supporting information and come back to that one so I can really give it the fair shake it deserves. But yeah, do I have anything else? There is more one shot. We're taking the not to spoil things, but we are taking a second shot at one shot to put it as roundabout as possible. To spoil the minimum amount of things, but we're taking a second shot at one shot, so we'll still be on Tuesdays. Keep one eye on both my Discord and theoretically Twitter, probably. So those exist. There is a Discord. There is a Twitter. If you're very I might have said Twitter a little too quickly. There is a Twitter command, I promise. Oh, maybe not. Well, there's a Twitter. It's the same as the Twitch. _ Nestor. Keep one eye on one or both of those things, and just know that I am spending less time on Twitter because it is currently on fire. But so the Discord is your best bet. I will be announcing things there. We'll be back Tuesday for some more one shot. I'm fascinated with how that's developing. We'll be picking up another book same time next week. What else? Oh yeah, I've been working on my TikTok and behind the scenes. If you want to stay caught up with that, TikTok does not allow underscores, so it's just Glacier Nestor all run together. Do I have anything else to promote? I already did the Codex spiel. I think that's it. Yeah, if you want more, want more books, go check out the YouTube. There is a series of VODs there. They're a little behind, but I'm almost caught up. I've got all the paper cuts VODs ready, and I'm slowly getting the other stuff ready. We're catching up. I'm somewhere around last stop, I think, for games. We might be doing more tabletop stuff, so keep one eye on things. Anyway, I've rattled on long enough. That's all my spiels. Go check out my stuff. I promise them fun. This has been Paper Cuts. And I hope